Like now, I'd like you to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All righty, good morning, everybody. A lot of people here. I encourage you to check your cell phone, make sure it's on silent. It's embarrassing when it goes off sometimes. If you need a listening device, let one of our staff know. They can help you with that. And if you plan on speaking today, we do have a sign in by the door. So we'd really like your name and address. That way you don't have to give all that public information when you come up to speak. We'll still ask you to give you your name when you speak. Please speak into the mic so everybody can hear you and your comments are public. I'm going to break with a little bit of how we normally do things. We're expecting a significant amount of public input today. So what we're going to do, just kind of give you our rules of engagement, for lack of a better term. We're going to give both proponents, and proponents of the land use ordinance are those that are in favor of the ordinance or some form of the ordinance, and the opponents would be, of course, those that don't want an ordinance or the ordinance as it's presented. So proponents and opponents will each be given 1 hour of speaking time. Included in that hour for the proponents is the rebuttal. So you might want to, if you're going to want to rebut, you're going to have to save some time of your 1 hour for rebuttal. So again, please sign in prior to speaking. If you're speaking on behalf of a group or entity, you should note that representation and indicate that on the sign-up sheet. All persons wishing to make public comment will be, well, let me ask, how many people present are planning on speaking as proponents? Keep your hands up, please. I got to get an idea here. So, yeah, we're going to have to probably limit the time to 3 minutes per person, unless you're speaking on behalf of the group. If, in order to avoid duplication of comments, if your comment is a simple, I agree with the previous comments, but you want to be on record as making that comment, get up, give your name, and say, I agree, or me too, is what's done at the legislative session. That way you can go on record as having the same comments without making the same comments. In the event that there's any amendments to the ordinance being proposed, so what we'll do is we'll go through the ordinance as it is written. We will take public comment, then the commissioners will take up the debate. Okay. At that point, we may see amendments proposed. If an amendment is proposed, it will need a second. And if there is a second, we will go back to public comment. We'll limit public comment to 10 minutes per side on each amendment. Okay. And then it'll go back to the commissioners to vote on the amendment. That doesn't mean the ordinance is passed. It just means it's an amendment to the ordinance. And if we have several of them, then that'll go on until we're done with the amendments. You will notice that we have 4 commissioners here. According to state statute, I've been advised that if anything is a 2-2 vote, it will automatically carry over to a future commission meeting. Most likely, I believe June 6th is the date for a second run at it when there's 5 commissioners. So we cannot have a tie vote, okay? That includes amendments to the ordinance, and that includes the ordinance itself, okay? So we have a little bit of other commission business before we get into this. So if you need a few minutes to put your heads together, we can take a short recess so you have a chance to coordinate your efforts, either as proponents or opponents. So what I'm going to look for right now is a motion to approve our agenda.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We will move on to our consent agenda.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second?
Motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Benega.
Aye.
Blindberg.
Aye.
Kipley.
Aye.
Karski.
Aye. Approves our consent agenda. We will move on to regular business. Our first item is consider bid results and award recommendation for MC 1710 Highway 149 wetland mitigation and authorize the chair to sign an agreement with Ducks Unlimited, Inc. Bids are open on May 17th. Mr. Groen.
Good morning, Commissioners. Steve Groen, Highway Superintendent. Thank you for letting me go number one today. I really appreciate that. Part of our Federal Army Corps permitting in conjunction with the state DANR requires us to mitigate the 0.3 acres of stream channel and just over 2 acres of wetlands that are being impacted by our project rebuilding Highway 149. Heading south out of Colton, we put those out for bids, and Ducks Unlimited was the low bid for us to purchase 21 functional capacity units to mitigate the wetland impacts. Looking for your support to allow us to complete the purchase of these wetland credits.
Questions for Steve? Anybody here for public comment on wetland mitigation? Okay. Look for a motion.
I'll move for approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Benega.
Aye.
Kipley.
Aye.
Blindberg.
Aye.
Karski.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, Steve. We will now move on to our public hearing and second reading to consider adoption of ordinance amendment number 2302. Scott Anderson, Planning Director. Before we get to this, Scott, does any group wish to take a few minutes to break to conference? Everybody's good? I don't see anybody looking to do that. Okay, go ahead, Scott.
Thank you. Scott Anderson, Planning Director, and today, as you indicated, is the public hearing, the second reading and possible final adoption of an ordinance amendment. As we're aware, this is an ordinance amendment that would regulate transmission pipelines, and this has gone before the Planning Commission. It was at the Planning Commission in April, and it was voted 6-0 to approve the ordinance and send it on to the County Commission. And before I'll give you a brief, and the audience, a brief explanation, because sometimes zoning can be complicated, but this sets up transmission pipelines as a permitted special use in several zoning districts in the county. Now, I want to explain the differences between, because this is vital and it's important for everyone to know. So you have a zoning district, and then you have, within that zoning district, you have permitted uses, special permitted uses, and conditional uses. Permitted uses are things that are just allowed. For example, agricultural crops or a house maybe is just a permitted use in a residential district. Then you get in, the next category is permitted special uses. And that would be uses that if you meet criteria that is set forth in the zoning ordinance, you meet all that criteria, it's permitted. If you do not meet that criteria, you have the option of taking that use and applying for a conditional use. And then that would go to the Planning Commission. A conditional use is a use that's specified that always has a public hearing before the Planning Commission. So those are the three differences. Now, the way this ordinance, the proposed ordinance, is being brought to you is a transmission pipeline would be a permitted special use. That would mean there is some set criteria. If that transmission pipeline meets all that criteria, for example, setbacks, providing information, a number of criteria that's set forth, if the applicant can meet all of that criteria, it's permitted. They have the right, we issue a special permitted use, they move ahead. If for some reason they cannot meet that requirement, the requirement set forth, then they have the option of requesting a conditional use permit. And that would go to the Planning Commission. Neighbors would be notified, property owners within 500 feet would all be notified, a sign would be posted on the property, and we go through the hearing process. The hearing process being, it goes to the Planning Commission, We have a public hearing. The planning commission can make recommendations, add conditions, and so on. And then after that, there is a 1-week period that anyone can appeal that planning commission decision. The applicant could appeal, a neighbor or a property owner, an aggrieved citizen, anyone can appeal. The planning staff could appeal. Anyone can appeal that, and we place it on an agenda for the county commission to have a hearing, and we go through that process. So let me explain the districts that we are adding the permitted special use to, and the reasons for that. So the transmission pipeline is going to be, we're proposing to add this as a permitted special use in the A1 Agriculture District, the Rural Residential District, the R1 Residential District, the C Commercial District, the I1 Light Industrial District, the I2 General Industrial District, and the RC Recreation Conservation District. And then in addition, the proposed ordinance sets up additional use regulations. This is the meats and bones, the nuts and bolts of what they need to meet in order to apply for the permitted special use. And then the ordinance also sets forth several definitions, because we did not have definitions for transmission pipelines and let's see, it was transmission pipelines that are created, a gas pipeline facility, a hazardous liquid pipeline facility, a regulated substance, and transmission pipeline. So those definitions are included in the ordinance, and those will be either added or amended to the existing ordinance. And then finally, there's a severability clause, which is basically saying that if a portion of the ordinance is overturned, then not the entire ordinance is overturned. So there is a setback that's being proposed, and Trish, if you could scroll back to the proposed setback, because that's really, I think, going to be the one of the major talking points that you're probably going to hear today. Is there is some criteria, some separation criteria that is put forth in the proposed ordinance. From a dwelling, a church, or a business, we're proposing a 750-foot setback. From a public park or a school, there's a 1,000-foot setback. And then there's some setbacks from first class, second class, and third class municipalities. And those are spelled out on the threshold for the size of those municipalities, and then the setback is either going to be 1 mile, 3/4 of a mile, or half a mile. Now, the way this is prepared is an applicant, they being the applicant, need to meet the criteria, if the minimum setback criteria. If they do not meet that criteria, there is an option written in the ordinance that the landowner can sign a waiver, and they could build closer, providing that landowner has signed that waiver. So there's some mechanisms in there. If they cannot obtain the waiver and they still can't meet that setback, that would trigger the conditional use permit process. So with that being said, I also have prepared some maps. If at some point you'd like to look at them, there is some general maps that show the entire county and what a 750-foot setback would look like. And then we also have a map for each township, going from northwest to northeast, sort of through the entire county. And that's just for visual effect. It's not, because we're always going to be adding new residences. So it is at that point of the moment. Right now, it shows you what a general setback would look like, and then gives you an idea of that there are areas that you could have a proposed pipeline go through. So I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Why wait? Let's see the map.
So if you could bring those up, Trish, because it is sort of interesting. Let's see. Yeah, just do let's do the
Full county.
full county, and then we'll do yeah, there you go. So if you, there you go. So this shows, basically, it's very interesting, and we sometimes don't realize how densely populated our county is. But so the blue dots basically show every residence and a 750-foot setback around that. And then it shows the setback around municipalities. And if you'd like, we can go through, for example, why don't we go back to one of the townships, Trish? If you go back to the township map, and there you go. So we have this set up. This would be starting in the northwest county. This, I think, is Buffalo Township. And it would show you the setbacks from existing residences. And if you keep on scrolling, it'll go to the next. I think it goes to that's Buffalo Township. If you scroll down, this is the next one, which I think is Teope. If you scroll down a little bit further, Trish, I think it's Teope. Yep. So if you go back up, it shows you, Colton, the setback for Colton, and then the residences. And we have this, we can pull up any township you want, but like I indicated, they start at the northwest corner, they go across and then down and then over and down and over and down and over. So if you like, we can look at a specific township, but this just gives you the general idea of what we've prepared and the wonders of GIS. So
Just for clarification, this setback is from the property line, not from the structures?
right now, the way the ordinance is written, it's from the property line.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Righty.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. All righty. Now we will go into testimony from proponents, and proponents are those that are in favor of this ordinance. I'm going to ask that if there is a spokesperson, that they go first, and that spokesperson, if you would have your people that you're speaking for at least raise their hand or stand so we have an understanding of the size of your group. Just, yeah, put it there and she can pass it down.
Morning, Commissioners. My name is Glenn Scott. I'm from Valley Springs area. I am an affected landowner. Pipeline will be coming through my area. But I'm also clerk of the Valley Springs Township. Placed in front of you is a copy of a resolution that was sent out to townships. And this is signed by several townships. Those include Valley Springs Township, Red Rock, Wall Lake, Hartford, Wellington, and Humboldt Townships. There are other townships that are in the process of examining this resolution, and they were still, even as of yesterday, I was receiving some copies. I would like to read the resolution before you. Whereas, with two proposals now pending before the South Dakota Public Utilities Commission, applicants Summit Carbon Solutions and Heartland Greenway Pipeline System intend to embed their carbon dioxide capture transport pipelines within Valley Springs Township and other Minnehaha County townships, intending to benefit from the substantial federal tax credits and direct payments made possible by the Tax Credit Code 45Q, while serving ethanol production facility customers looking to enhance their own respective environment and social government bona fides. And whereas the proposed pipelines will carry not a valuable commodity for resale for public benefit, but rather a potentially dangerous byproduct of the distilling process, having inherent value only because of the targeted federal tax law. And whereas the method and manner of transporting carbon dioxide by pipeline is a dangerous proposition, requiring very substantial setbacks from occupied dwellings and other places of human habitation, a risk that currently county zoning laws have neither properly identified nor made allowance for. And whereas other recent state legislative efforts to clarify that these waste pipelines are not common carriers, and thus for which the right of eminent domain is not available, have all seemingly failed. Whereas the Board of Supervisors of Valley Springs Township is immediately concerned these pipelines may be soon permitted, installed, and operated within our township and county without proper, safe setbacks. Being concerned also that such placement will then impede the future growth and development of both urban and rural properties, with no local public benefit beyond the permitting of a few to greatly profit under the current focus of the federal tax code. And whereas fostering of such enterprises, offering an outsized and permanent negative impact upon both landowners and residents, far beyond the small confines of their immediate rights-of-way, represents a substantial infringement upon both the property and human rights of all residents of Minnehaha County, South Dakota. It is now therefore resolved, the Board of Supervisors of Valley Springs Township urgently requests that the Board of Commissioners in and for Minnehaha County take such further action by amending county zoning regulations for and within the Recreation Conservation District and Ag Districts to the effect that if such pipelines are constructed, placed, and operated, the public, at minimum, will be assured of adequate setback distances, both to and from all points of current human occupation and dwelling and the ownership interests of non-participants. This is signed by the Valley Springs Township Board of Supervisors. And you have copies of those from other townships. Those of us who work for government entities have a duty to our constituents. On the township level, we deal with bridges and roads and culverts, and in the wintertime, we plow snow roads and pull people out of the ditch. We don't do this for the money. We do it because we care about our constituents. We care about the preservation of our community. Likewise, as county commissioners, you have a much bigger role, much more problems, much more to deal with. But I feel our purpose is the same. We care about the people in our jurisdiction. We care about our communities. We also care about the preservation of our community. These two pipelines carrying hazardous material through Minnehaha County threatens both the residents and the land it passes through. If either of these proposed pipelines are approved, then appropriate setback is essential. Minnehaha County is a beautiful place to live, and we hope you will help us keep it that way. In closing, we request that you support, at a bare minimum, the resolution brought forward from the Planning and Zoning Commission as written, which calls for a 750-foot setback. We plan on speaking for 40 minutes and saving 20 minutes for rebuttal. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Who's next?
Warren Guide, Hartford, South Dakota. Last fall I was here and asked you commissioners to kind of protect my property and my rights, and the ball's been going down the street long enough, I guess, so kind of hope we can put it away today or soon. Planning and zoning has made this proposal, and I agree with it. I wish it was more. 750 feet from my house is, well, it's twice the length of this building, which if it ruptures, that pipeline would rupture, it would send dirt and debris that far. And we're not even talking about the substance in the pipeline yet. So with that being said, I agree with Mr. Scott on 750 feet is a minimum. If you go less than that, I think we're kind of defeating the purpose of what we're doing here today. So you've been elected to kind of protect and serve us, and I kind of hope you do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gady.
Good morning. Kay Burkhart from Valley Springs. We farm, we grow corn, we sell it to the ethanol plants, and then we haul the DDG back home. So we are pro-ethanol. I'd like to thank the staff and the state's attorney for working so hard on this ordinance. I think they've done a really good job, and we would be really grateful to have these ordinances in place to protect our families. I understand that one of the concerns is being sued by the pipeline companies for passing an ordinance that is too confining. Since this ordinance was developed by your state's attorney's office, you can trust that they believe it's defensible. If safety was important, we'd be asking for much larger setbacks, but this is not about the safety of the Minnehaha County residents. This is about intelligent land use and planning for the future Minnehaha County's development and people. Your staff and your state's attorney's office know Minnehaha County. They have worked hard on this, they understand it, and I think they can be trusted. We accept the 750-foot setback from the residences, and it should be short enough that the pipeline certainly should be in agreement also. If they're not in agreement, really all we need is some plume studies that would support their shorter setbacks. I hope each of you plan to stand behind your staff and state's attorney's office and pass this ordinance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kay.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Chase Jensen. I want to thank you that we are here. It's been a long year and a half of folks attending meetings, planning and zoning, commission, asking for something to be done. And we're extremely grateful that Minnehaha is helping to lead the way in the state, having the state's attorney office work on an ordinance, bring something forward today. I want to clarify at the head of this conversation that we understand your role is not to fix the really bad eminent domain laws that allow abuse to happen in this state, that allows for, over 80 people to already have been sued without a permit by the company. That's not your role. We understand that you are not creating safety standards, how thick the pipe is going to be, how far the pump stations are from one another. We understand there's a lot of concerns that are raised by this, and as some of the closest elected public officials, you certainly have received lots of issues. You've had earfuls, probably more than 2 earfuls worth, of all the issues that have been raised. We think that the ordinance that's been drafted is fully within your lane of what you have legal authority to do. And in fact, we think it's one of the most conservative ordinances you could have written based on the legal authority you have to do siting and zoning regulations. We also want to clarify that any talking points that are going to say that the sky is going to turn dark and the moon will turn red and ethanol will die tomorrow if this is passed are completely ridiculous. The amount of money that the ethanol plants stand to lose or gain has nothing to do with y'all putting forward intelligent land use ordinances. The number of jobs that the supposed number of jobs that these projects would bring to the state, completely irrelevant. The need that one industry has for this to happen, not germane to the conversation. We understand that. We believe that this ordinance, as it currently stands, is legally defendable. We wish it was more. We think it should be more. We also believe that as it stands, being a rather conservative ordinance, it is already bent towards the companies compared to the people in terms of what we would like to see. And so amendments that are offered that would water it down, that would make it less substantive, we would see as taking something that already bends towards the companies and just throws it all the way to that side. The last comment that I'll say right now is that another talking point we've all probably heard, potentially rolled our eyes at, is that this is changing the rules in the middle of the game. There are no CO2 hazardous pipelines that are permitted in the state that this would be changing the rules on. It's a new game, a game that a lot of people might say they never signed up to play, but find themselves on the field nonetheless. And the real game that's being changed for landowners who have been here for 16, 18 months, is that for generations, they worked, lived, cared for the land, had dreams of developing it, had dreams of keeping it the way it is. Whatever it was, they had a game that they've been playing that is now being interrupted.
I'm going to give you 30 more seconds, Chase, okay?
Yep. So I'll leave it there. We ask that you would support the ordinance, that you would resist amendments unless they increase the setback from residences. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. John Sharda, farmer, landowner from Valley Springs, also a representative. The two prior speakers touched on this too, but I'm a big supporter of ethanol. I buy distillers, I sell corn to ethanol plants, I buy as much ethanol as I can. This ordinance is not about ethanol, which they might try to lead you to believe. This ordinance is about the proper use of Minnehaha County land. The pipeline is routed to go on the south side of Sioux Falls, the west side of Sioux Falls, the east side of Sioux Falls. This could really hamper economic growth and development in Minnehaha County. So I just encourage you to pass the ordinance as written. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Gary Meyer, Minnehaha County. Let me start by saying I am speaking for myself and I am in support of this ordinance. I am very fortunate that none of my family's land has been targeted by these pipelines. I am here for my friends and neighbors like Orrin, who got up here and spoke earlier. I see what this is doing to them. Last month, the landowners left this building celebrating a victory, a unanimous vote in favor of this ordinance. While I think it's somewhat of a small victory, nonetheless, if you lose a toe but can save your leg, it's worth celebrating. But since that day, I've had many sleepless nights. While this ordinance is overall a very good start, the part that troubles me is the section in Table 1. It says that if you live in a municipality of a population of 5,000 or greater, you're considered first class, and you get 5,280 feet between the pipeline and the edge of town. If you live in a population between 500 and 5,000, you're considered second class, and you get 3,960 feet clearance. A population of less than 500, you're considered third class, but you still get 2,640 feet. Now, unfortunately, the farmers in the rural community don't even get a class. They get 750 feet. And I just have to shake my head how disrespectful I feel this is of our rural community, especially the farmers. Should there ever be a rupture, they only get a 750-foot head start to gather their family and outrun a giant cloud of air void of any life-saving oxygen. And what makes it even worse for me is I've heard rumblings that some feel this number needs to be even lower. My comment is that anybody who has the courage to even suggest this better be able to look at all these folks in the eye and tell them that in the name of progress, your life is unfortunately just collateral damage. I am asking all of you for a yes vote on this moratorium. It is in the very least a good start to give these folks a fighting chance against these giant corporations. Thank you.
Good morning. Carla Lems, 47980 281st Street, Canton, South Dakota. I'm a representative of District 16, so I do not reside in Lincoln County, but I have heard from many of my constituents who have concerns about this issue. And I am also a property owner in Lincoln County, affected by both of the pipelines. But I also own property in Minnehaha County. So I just want to thank the planning and zoning staff, along with the state's attorney, for their hard work on this ordinance before you. The unanimous vote taken in the previous meeting regarding this ordinance sent a strong message to your citizens of Minnehaha County and to other counties in the state of South Dakota. It showed that you are here to structure this ordinance in such a way that addresses the needs and the best interests of your citizens. The ordinance is defensible, and it is of great benefit to this county, and I believe it should be passed as written. I would ask you to please lead on this issue and vote yes, and I will just leave you this from the South Dakota State Constitution, Article 6, Section 1. All men are born equally free and independent and have certain inherent rights, among which are those are enjoying and defending life and liberty, of acquiring and protecting property, and the pursuit of happiness. And to secure these rights, governments, which you are a part of, are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So I would just ask you to represent your citizens. Thank you.
Bev Nelson, Valley Springs. I would just like to add, please pass this ordinance as it's written by your planning and zoning staff. They know what they're doing, they put a lot of work into this, and it's defensible. And at this point, I'm leaving the rest of my time and would urge the rest of our proponents to step back, and we will reserve the rest of the time for rebuttal time. Thank you.
Thank you. We've taken up about roughly 20 minutes, so if you wanted 20 minutes for rebuttal, we still have time, so.
It'll be really short. Hi, I am Representative Bethany Soy. I represent District 9, and I'm here on behalf of my constituents who are affected by the pipeline, especially the city of Hartford and the rural Wall Lake area. Specifically, Hartford is rapidly expanding. It's a very vibrant community, and they are concerned about how close the pipeline is going to be to their city limits and how it will hinder economic development. Right now, it's proposed to be very close to the western boundary, and the proposed setback would greatly benefit the town, giving them a mile of further expansion. Honestly, we'd like to see it a little bit farther, but if this is the best we can do, we'd definitely take it. That would really benefit the town and my constituents and allow them to continue growing. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Good morning. State Representative Sue Peterson, District 13, Sioux Falls. I'm also here representing constituents. And I would just like, in the interest of time, to offer a me too to the testimony that has encouraged you to support the ordinance as it is and to resist any amendments that would decrease the setbacks, but to take the Planning and Zoning Committee's recommendation and go with the work in the study that they've put in. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any other proponents that would like to speak before we hear from opponents? All righty. So our proponents of the ordinance have had their opportunity. We'll now hear testimony or public comment, I guess, would be appropriate from opponents of our proposed ordinance. Anybody representing the proponents, I would ask that you come up first. I'm sorry, the opponents, you come up first and maybe identify who you are speaking for.
Speaking for myself, but I do represent ethanol plant. I've been part of Dakota Ethanol since its inception, so I got some sweat equity in there.
Your name, sir?
Todd Brown, Del Rapids.
Todd Brown.
I did sign in out there. But I guess the question I would have, first of all, is what's the current setback for this? It's 750 up there for dwellings and things?
We'll have to have that question answered
Okay.
later here.
Because when I look at the map, I'm trying to figure out how we get a pipeline to come through here. And that wouldn't happen without every individual landowner having a say in that, which is a good thing, I agree. But at the end of the day, this pipeline can't be snaking around and moving. The ethanol industry, I've heard, is this is the only thing for it, and it is. This is a big deal for the ethanol industry. When we started this industry, the gasoline and automobile demand was going up or whatever, and we were going to build into that. As you've all heard, there's electric cars, there's things like that. So where are we going for growth? What I'm saying is our goal has changed, or what we're after, and we're going for sustainable aviation fuel. We're going for jet fuel, things like that, to try to maintain our growth. I also am a landowner, and on the east side of Del Rapids, the Navigator, I call it, I think it's Heartland Greenway, is going across. I have signed the easement for it. I had to work with them. I've got a lot of tile lines and things like that through there, and I've had to work with them, and they've been able to accommodate me, so I did sign for it or whatever. This is a big deal for the ethanol industry. It is a big deal if you're a corn farmer in this state, and I do understand that there is risk with it. I have farmed over a natural gas pipeline that's got 600 pounds pressure through it for 40 years. There's never been an issue. I've tiled over it. I've raised the same crops over it. So I do see there's risk with all this. But there was a risk when I jumped in the car and drove down here today. We have to do things to make sure we sustain the jobs and the things that are out here, or the rural economy that we are part of. Minnehaha County does have a lot of cities and towns, but it also is a very productive rural economy that needs to be sustained and seen for. So I would suggest that you do not adopt any new regulations, and partly because what were the rules when Summit and Heartland Greenway came into it? That's what they set their business up for. And in my opinion, I think you are changing the rules in the middle of the game. And it is not a game. This is a serious business. Whether you like your federal dollars being spent on this here, it is what's happening, and there is a push for this, and we all breathe this air. And we should all respect that we're trying to do our share to clean that up. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. All right. Other opponents of the ordinance?
I want to thank the commissioners of Minnehaha County for your ongoing efforts to support our project and moving forward. My name is Walter Wendland. I'm president and CEO of Ringneck Energy in Oneida, South Dakota. I'm also president of the South Dakota Ethanol Producers, representing 16 ethanol plants within the state. My address is 802 Redwood Avenue in Oneida, South Dakota, if you need that. You know, our industry advocates for expansion in ethanol production and for greater access to emerging markets. The state and federal policies help us grow. According to the Department of Agriculture, the state produces more than $4 billion worth of corn a year, creates that much value. We're a very friendly, business-friendly state, and we need this pipeline to be able to continue with that focus. You know, right now, only 3% of our production stays in the state. We're not a very populous state. So we really rely on other states for our market, for our value-added product. There's not a single option that is better for the ethanol industry right now than carbon sequestration. You know, we can generate our own electricity, or we can, you know, improve our farming practices. But that's minimal compared to the 30 points that we accomplish with carbon sequestration in our industry. And it really goes back to agriculture. I've farmed since 1975. I went through the 80s. I started over in 86. And, you know, one of the reasons why I'm such an advocate for ethanol is that I don't want my son to go through the same thing that I did in the 80s. It is very, it changed our lives for what we always wanted to be involved in agriculture. And we have been involved in agriculture, just had to pursue it in a different way after we went through the 80s. But I think that the commissioners all received a report. We emailed the economic impacts of a CO2 pipeline in South Dakota. This study was just done by the Dakota Institute from Sioux Falls, and it showed that by allowing the pipeline to be built in South Dakota, we're going to create 5,353 jobs during the construction process and over 3,000 during the operation process. But more importantly, we're going to create more demand for corn in the state. We expect our industry to grow within the state to produce an extra 277 million gallons and create a new market for 77 million bushels of corn within the state. And that will generate over $6 billion in gross output for the state of South Dakota over a 10-year period. I mean, when I got in this industry, it seemed like we transitioned from talking about thousands to millions. Now our industry talks about billions of dollars that we generate within these states' economies. And South Dakota is continuing to grow. We've actually now fourth largest producer of ethanol in the United States. We passed 2 states last year in production, mainly because we're a business-friendly state. We don't over-regulate. We allow the companies to operate, and it's just we need this pipeline because we can't compete. You've heard people say that, we support ethanol, but we don't support the pipeline. You can't be for ethanol and against the pipeline. We can't compete without the pipeline. Other states don't need a pipeline to be able to put their CO2 in the ground. They can just drill a hole and get permission. But those states are, Eastern Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Texas, Western Kansas, Colorado. They're going to put our state at a huge disadvantage if we're not allowed to be able to capture our CO2. It's 60 cents a gallon, and that's by far the difference between profit and loss. Also, our industry focuses on a margin. We buy our corn and we sell the ethanol and co-products. We live in that margin. What happens if we can't sell our ethanol? Our margin collapses, but more so, we have to lower our price of corn to be able to compete. And that's a scenario that will take place if we aren't allowed to be able to have a level playing field with the rest of the industry. So it's critical to the farmers in South Dakota. It's critical to the ethanol industry in South Dakota that this project's allowed to move forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Wendland.
Good morning. My name is John Godfrey. I'm a senior principal consultant with DNV. My business address is 5777 France Road in Dublin, Ohio. I've been asked to be here today as a pipeline safety specialist. I have over 35 years in the pipeline industry. I have worked in pipeline hazardous liquid operations for over 22 years. I've worked in design, pipe manufacturing, pipeline maintenance, and for the last 8 years, I've been a consultant with DNV. DNV is an international standards body. We wrote the recommended practice, RPF 104, for the design, construction, and operation of CO2 pipelines that's applied worldwide. DNV is also a test organization. We have test facilities both in the United States and in Europe that have conducted full-scale tests on CO2 pipelines, on CO2 itself, on its compatibility with materials, and how it behaves in the pipeline environment. We're also a consulting agency. We have developed the software FAST, which does air dispersion modeling and plume modeling for CO2 pipelines. And we provide those engineering and consulting services to pipeline operators and to agencies. We participate with the Department of Energy in CO2 pipeline research, and we provide that research and collaborate with the U.S. DOT Pipeline and Hazardous Safety Administration Department in the evaluation of pipeline safety in CO2 service. That's a bit of the history of myself and a bit of history of what DNV does. Now, as far as CO2 pipelines in the United States, there's over 5,100 miles of active CO2 pipelines in the U.S., ranging from 30-inch diameter down to 4-inch diameter, operating at pressures of up to 3,000 psi, well within the range of the proposed projects in South Dakota. They are regulated as hazardous liquid pipelines when the CO2 is transported in what is called dense phase or supercritical phase. That is a phase where the CO2 is compressed to the density of a liquid but maintains properties of a gas. So it's neither a liquid nor a gas, it's somewhere in between. And that's how both of these projects are proposed to be designed, built, and operated, is within that dense phase operating regime, which makes them regulated, as I said, under DOT PHMSA's Part 195 pipeline safety regulations. These are the same stringent pipeline safety regulations that cover the transportation of diesel, propane, anhydrous ammonia, other commodities that are highly toxic and have great safety concerns. CO2 pipelines in the United States have been regulated for over 40 years with a very good safety record. There has been one recordable injury using DOT's recording thresholds, and that was to a pipeline contractor that was doing work at a facility. Pipeline transportation is by and large recognized as the safest mode of transportation for commodities, whether it be gas or liquids. It far surpasses rail, truck, or other modes of transportation in safety. Pipeline ruptures, as people have mentioned here today, are extremely, extremely rare. It's on the order of 1 in a million chances of having a pipeline rupture. And that's borne out across all of the pipeline industry. The pipeline regulations themselves focus on preventing those ruptures. The regulations focus on identifying threats to the pipelines and preventing those threats through design standards, construction requirements, and operations and maintenance regulations. Same regulations that apply to these pipelines. The focus is on preventing the threats and reducing them. My entire career with the industry has been built around integrity management and pipeline safety. For 35 years, I've worked to help develop the regulations, worked with the American Petroleum Institute, the Association of Oil Pipelines, and we proposed and helped build safety regulations to vastly improve safety performance of the pipeline system. And I'm very proud of that record because the best way to prevent a catastrophic release is to prevent a release in the first place. And that's the focus of what the industry is doing and what these CO2 projects have to deal with. CO2 is very well understood. As I said, the U.S., we've been regulating and transporting CO2 for regulating over 40 years, but transporting it for greater than that. Some of the first CO2 pipelines were built in the 1950s. It's a well understood commodity. It's not new, it's not novel. The threats to any other pipeline are the same threats for CO2: external corrosion, internal corrosion, outside force damage, earth movement. The small variances that apply with CO2 are addressed in regulation, and they're easily managed by the pipeline operator and by the pipeline developer. There's nothing really novel about a CO2 pipeline that's different from a regular operating pipeline. The CO2 that's being proposed to be transported from the ethanol collection facilities in these projects is very pure CO2. It has very few impurities. It's coming directly off of the fermentation process. It does not include exhaust gas. I've been working with Summit for a period of time now as a consultant, and their project is entirely off of the fermentation process. So you're not getting any of the sulfur oxide contaminants, nitrous oxide contaminants. It's very pure. So a lot of the concerns that people have had about impurities and health effects and threats such as internal corrosion or other things in the CO2 stream being abnormal generally do not apply to these projects. It's very different than a lot of the enhanced oil recovery pipelines that have gotten news in the press down in the Gulf Coast that pull CO2 from natural formations, because that CO2 contains impurities such as hydrogen sulfide, even combustion gas with nitrous oxides and different things create a much higher toxicity and a much higher safety hazard than what's being proposed here. And that gets into consequences. And I want to address a couple of misconceptions about air dispersion and plume modeling. As I mentioned before, DNV is an advisory firm. We're headquartered in Norway. We have test facilities in Europe. We have one named SpadeAtom in the UK. And there has been a video that was produced at our SpadeAtom facility during a full-scale CO2 test. And it unfortunately has made the web and has been picked up by a lot of organizations. That was done without authorization. We have taken the video down because it's been misrepresented. The cloud that's seen in the video is water vapor. The test was conducted in a controlled environment to specifically measure the concentration of CO2 at different distances from a release that was initiated with a shape charge when the pipe was blown up. So it was done to provide the worst possible conditions and the worst possible scenario, and then measure what the effects are so we could go back and fine-tune our computational models and assist the industry in better understanding how CO2 performs. The cloud seen that day was water vapor. The concentration never reached lethal levels at distances greater than 50 meters from the test site. And something about CO2 dispersion. It is governed by atmospheric conditions such as the weather, wind speed, temperature, relative humidity, atmospheric stability. It's also governed by land use, whether it's forested, open land, what the terrain happens to be, and also the initial size of the release. Those are the major components. Once that release occurs under those conditions, it will quickly go to the furthest extent of its plume. Higher winds don't move it further away, they disperse it. Time doesn't make it bigger, it disperses it. The placement of block valves or pump stations may affect the amount of time that the release is occurring, but it doesn't affect the distance that it travels. The distance that it travels is purely affected and only affected by the atmosphere and the land use. So there's a big misconception that's been going around in a number of places that strong wind out of the north, a change in wind direction this way is going to carry it an extra 2 miles further down towards a community or a residence or somebody's farm, and that's just not the truth. The size of the release is determined at the time of the release, and everything beyond that generally works to reduce the concentration levels, and those concentration levels vary across the distance that it goes. So I'm not a toxicologist. I can say from our publications and our standard that the lethality level is considered between 15 and 17% by volume for CO2. And those percentages occur from our testing very, very close to the release sites.
Mr. Godfrey?
Yes, sir.
You're right, a little over 10 minutes. Since you're
gave me
speaking as a
15,
group, I don't know how much more time you're requesting, but I know that there's other people that would like to testify, but in the interest of your technical knowledge, I've let you go on longer than anyone else. How much more time do you anticipate you'll need?
Probably just another 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
So to address this specifically, the selection of pipeline route in pipeline design is primarily a consideration of addressing threats. Routes are chosen to not only look at what is in proximity to the pipeline, but what is the threat along those routes? Where do you have water crossings where you may have erosion or scour? Where do you have potential landslide areas? Where is the land use conducive to the potential for third-party damage? Basing setbacks based on arbitrary requirements, things that haven't really played out in terms of the specific project, reduce an operator's ability to route that pipeline to reduce the potential for a release. And our industry focuses on reducing the threats and preventing the releases. Encumbrances on route selection really work against that philosophy. And that is all I have today. So thank you very much for the time.
Good morning, Commission. Thank you all for your time. I do have a handout, so I'll pass this out up here real quick.
Why don't I hand them to Tyler? He can take care of that for you. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, my name is Aaron Eldridge. I am the South Dakota Project Manager for the Summit Carbon Solutions project and pipeline. And so I want to spend just a few minutes talking about some of the things that we've covered and providing a little bit of additional information. So what we're handing out right now is a list of maps of pipelines that are existing in Minnehaha County in South Dakota, near some cities in South Dakota, as well as just our general project footprint. And so while you guys are looking over that, I do want to touch on a few things. So obviously, the consensus of the group here is that this ordinance does not pertain to safety, that's what this ordinance has to do with intelligent land use is what we're hearing. And what we see from that is that immediately after that statement, the comment is, if there's a shorter distance the pipeline companies would like to use, we'd like them to provide their plume studies, which brings us back to safety, right? So I understand that's not exactly what this discussion is, but I would like to touch on that a little bit, on that safety aspect, just to provide some additional information. So Mr. Godfrey was up here and he spoke on PHMSA and some of the regulations that have been put in place for the last 40 years. And so I would just like to touch on some specifics on what PHMSA regulates with CO2 pipelines, with hazardous liquid pipelines. Specifically in this case, so who is PHMSA real quick? PHMSA is a part of the federal government. It's a part of the DOT and is the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. And they oversee 3.3 million miles of hazardous pipelines in the United States. And as you go to one of the later maps, you'll see just how many of those pipelines are in the Midwest. And it's overlaid with the Summit Carbon Solutions pipeline route. So they regulate all different kinds of pipelines, including the 5,100 miles of CO2 pipelines that are currently operating in the United States. Specifically with our CO2 pipeline, some of the things that they regulate include design, construction, testing of the line after construction and prior to the startup, operator qualifications for construction of the pipeline and also the operation of the pipeline, the requirements that the operators have to follow and have to be able to work on that. Corrosion control to ensure that the line continues to operate safely into the future. And then operations and maintenance. And in that operation and maintenance, that includes emergency response and preparedness. And that's something that we do as a project as a whole, and a commitment that Summit is making to work with the local emergency responders as well to ensure that they are trained and properly equipped for the incidents that are very, very unlikely in this, but to ensure that we have that ongoing relationship with local emergency response in this case. So I do want to talk about some of the maps that we have, because as we talk about intelligent land use, the main comment we hear is that it restricts growth and that it lowers land values. And unfortunately, I don't remember the exact order of those maps, but as you go to the second map, I believe it shows Minnehaha County, and just the number of the pipelines in this county as a whole. There's over 105 miles of hazardous pipelines that go through Minnehaha County. And if you go to the next map, you will see Harrisburg, which is not in this county, but you can see just how many pipelines run directly through Harrisburg and the growth that it has had over the past many years with those pipelines still being in operation there. And so as we showed the map earlier, with proposed setbacks, with these setbacks, it is extremely, extremely difficult, if not impossible, to put any kind of a pipeline through this county. Not just the CO2 pipelines, but including the 105 miles of existing pipelines that have been operating safely in this county for many, many years. If you go to the last slide that you have, the last page that you have, it talks about some of the safety standards and some of the safety statistics, rather. And what that shows is that of those 105 miles of pipelines in Minnehaha County, in the last 25 years, there have been a total of 5 incidents that involves any kind of leak or injury, but there have been 0 injuries and 0 fatalities. If you look at the statistics for rail in Minnehaha County, that answer is vastly different. There have been many fatalities and there have been many, many injuries involving rail in the county. And so as we look at transporting any kind of liquid or any kind of material, pipelines are by far the safest way. There is a history of these pipelines operating safely in Minnehaha County in the state of South Dakota. And we're able to do that with the laws and regulations that are currently in place through the oversight of PHMSA, through those regulations. The final thing that I would like to mention is that as we look at these ordinances, as we talk through there, we hold the belief that PHMSA, that the federal government preempts the routing of these pipelines. And Summit Carbon Solutions is currently engaged in some litigation in Iowa, where a county did put in some ordinances. And I would just like to quote, so they're looking at 1,000 foot to 2 mile setbacks, similar depending on the area and what the what they were trying to route around, and they had some limited fees associated with that. And Judge Stephanie M. Rose of the U.S. District Court in Iowa, on the first page of the transcript, and I would be able to provide that if that would be requested, stated that, in my view, having read all the materials, preemption is pretty clear here. I don't know that there is any argument that isn't preempted in one way or another. And so while we appreciate the effort that goes into making sure that these pipelines are routed appropriately and that they operate safely, we do believe that these are preempted by federal law, and we want to make sure that that statement is clear. I will be here. I would be more than happy to answer any questions from design, construction, operation, including some, again, these maps and the data related to the pipelines and rail that currently exist in Minnehaha County. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Eldridge.
Good morning. My name is Monica Howard. I'm with Navigator. My title with them is Vice President of Regulatory and Environmental Permitting. Just a little background on me. I've been doing pipeline, energy, and linear infrastructure permitting and regulatory processes for over 20 years. So I'm not a stranger to conditional use permitting and land siting criteria and requirements. But I will say that the ordinances, this draft or the readings that we're seeing here that is not familiar to me. Talking about land use development, and responsible land use, which we fully support and want to be, a part of that process and not prohibit it. In our experience across the country with pipelines, you can find the easements only really restrict about 50 feet of that from a land use requirement, and that's for permanent structures to be developed on it. He showed you some county maps of local in South Dakota. But you see hazardous liquid pipelines built throughout highly populated areas with infrastructure all around it, such that it's not precluding additional development. One thing additional about the order of the ordinance and the timing, let's say, of the application and the requested information. While there's mention of a hierarchy of regulations when it comes to PHMSA's, the PUC process, and the local ordinances, it comes with environmental permitting as well. And so the blue and purple color-coded map that was provided showing what the county looks like with these setbacks in place. There are also federal environmental policy acts that we need to comply with when siting a pipeline. There's not one singular factor that goes into routing a pipeline to establish like this is the right place for it to be. In fact, there's very intelligent AI software out there now that helps facilitate proper and responsible routing of pipelines, taking into account thousands of data points and different resources to determine what is that right location, including, you know, environmental factors, population factors, growth factors, existing infrastructure. But looking at that colored map, that I didn't see a route on there that would pass muster in getting some of our federal environmental permits that are also necessary for that. So I worry about it being precluded or preempted in other ways as well. And like the gentleman from Summit said, I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions. I guess I should have started with the Me Too statement that I supported everything that was said in advance of that and just wanted to add those few extra items. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Howard.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Charlie Clute. I'm with the South Dakota Firefighters Association, and I'm going to be the first one to admit, I hope I'm the last one here because I could have, I feel I'm not a proponent or an opponent of this ordinance, but my involvement will become because the Firefighters Association oversees the training of the volunteer and career firefighters in the state of South Dakota. So any pipeline that runs through the state, we will have a little skin in that game when it comes about. Currently, I work with the PUC and the Pipeline Emergency Response Initiative. I also work with individuals from the National Volunteer Fire Council that are part of PHMSA. They are on the group of individuals that help make those regulations for PHMSA. And so when this came about, when I first caught wind of it, had a few phone calls, people asking me about the carbon capture pipelines, I have to admit, I wasn't up to snuff on what was going on. So I started making phone calls. I started calling the individuals that I knew both here in the state. I contacted the PUC. I contacted my friends from Mississippi, from West Virginia, from Illinois, that are all experts in pipeline transportation. And then I talked to them personally, once again, just last week when I had my National Volunteer Fire Council meetings. And I talked to them last year as well. And I said, educate me on this a little bit more. I said, I'm not understanding what the main concern is with carbon capture. And the one individual who I consider the leading expert in this from West Virginia, he said, I don't know why they're concerned either. All the other pipelines in this country have things a lot more hazardous and things to be concerned about if something goes wrong than they will with those. I said, okay, I guess that helps me a little bit. But your ordinance doesn't just deal with carbon capture. It deals with all pipelines. And so that's where I do come into, my concern comes in for that. I've read some of the reports or the PHMSA report on the one issue that is typically brought up about the pipeline that burst down in Mississippi. I read that entire report. Okay, I'm that kind of individual. Up until the point where they started talking about the testing of welds, then it got a little bit over the top of my head. Along with that, and as you have heard already, pipelines are the safest way to transport hazardous materials. I don't believe there is any other agency that would come up and refute that. And so if things have to be transported, I'm glad it's going to be in the pipeline. I don't consider myself an expert in pipelines, but I do consider myself well educated because I work with the South Dakota Pipeline Association on an annual basis. When they have their meetings, I'm part of those meetings. because of the fact that we are the ones in charge of getting that training out, or helping them get training out to all the responders in the state. So with that, from a more personal note, I have other pipelines that run within half a mile and a mile of the Trans-Canadian and the Dakota Access pipelines. Those were the two last major pipelines that ran through this state. And my family farm up in the Beetle County area, this is also going to be in some of that territory where carbon capture is going to be at as well. But I know what the landowners, our family, our neighbors, and everyone went through when those pipelines went through. They were very well taken care of, both by the contractors and by the companies. I'm glad I had to see the number of individuals here that have concern, because I heard those concerns from my relatives and friends and neighbors back up when those pipelines were coming through as well. However, right now, I could run absolutely everyone in the room here and everyone that's listening up to those territories and show you where the pipelines are. And unless you saw these signs, which you will see for every pipeline, these are the signs that I say the 60-second training for pipelines. I'll guarantee when you drive home, you'll see these pipelines along right-of-ways. They tell you what is there, whose it is, and what phone number to call. From an emergency responder standpoint, from some of the other comments that were made in the past, that's also why I decided I needed to come here. Because I had other fire departments and emergency responders saying, why are people saying that firefighters are going to drive into a plume? Why are they saying they're going to drive into a hazardous area? Okay, first off, that's done in the very first few weeks of firefighter training, that you don't put yourself in that situation, whether it's smoke or any type of hazardous material, liquid or gas. So from that standpoint, as a president, I didn't like getting chewed out by other firefighters saying, don't let that be the only representation of firefighters. So that is also why I'm here. And I'll be here for any other further questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Charlie.
Good morning, Commission. Trevor Jones with Summit Carbon Solutions. With the permission of the chair, and since there's still time, I believe, could I yield my time to John?
Yes, you have 20 minutes left.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, it looks like I'm back. Mr. Jones asked me to address something else that's come up just in the last couple of minutes as far as testimony, and that's the pipeline accident that occurred down in Satarsha, Mississippi. That's been in the press quite a bit. It was an issue of a 24-inch CO2 pipeline that ruptured and resulted in a release that unfortunately did affect a number of people in the community. To start right off the bat, DNV did perform the metallurgical examination on that failure. I have read that report, I have access to it, and I'm very familiar with the cause of the failure. And it had nothing to do with CO2 transport. It was a weld failure that occurred in an undermatched girth weld. Not that the weld was poor, that the pipe was too strong. And when the soil eroded under the pipe during an extreme weather event, the strain on the pipeline concentrated on that weld, much like a weak link in a chain. The weld separated and caused the rupture. The weld wasn't defective. The pipe was just too strong and there was no place for that strain to go. The problem with the release was a failure by the operator, Denbury, to assess the hazards of land movement, particularly during severe storm events and severe erosion along their pipeline. They were cited for it. They didn't follow regulations in their own operating procedures. They were also cited for their response. Denbury did not do the requisite public awareness and public notification requirements that all pipeline operators have to inform communities and local first responders to their location of their pipelines and the potential hazards of their pipelines. This proceeding today and the testimony we've already heard today make it obviously clear that that's not the case for these particular projects. The commitment from Summit Carbon to reach out to first responders, to reach out to local fire departments, to make sure that that level of public awareness is there, is what Denbury was cited for not doing. The fact that people in Satartia were not aware that there was a CO2 pipeline in the area, that when Denbury knew about the release within 10 minutes of the release, it took 40 minutes to get the word back to the first responders, and they weren't equipped with air monitors when they responded on site. They had to respond in the best way they possibly could. And that created a time lag. I will say that out of the 40 plus people who sought medical care at Satartia, and this is from the PHMSA report, not my personal experience, none were actually admitted to the hospital for CO2 exposure, and there were no injuries to them, and there were no injuries recorded to wildlife or to livestock in the area. The CO2 transported down there had H2S in it. It's from a natural formation, and it was well known to contain H2S, but air monitoring didn't start on site until 4 hours after the release. So when people talk about the plume of Satartia and how far it went, just remember it was without monitoring in that initial thing, and they were measuring any concentration of CO2, even levels that were well below any sort of toxicity or exposure level. And CO2 exposure has been very well studied. Believe it or not, mostly by the Navy, for submariners, where they have to scrub their air and they have to breathe recycled air. There are a lot of studies that can give you very detailed responses by people to different levels of CO2. As I said, it's not new. This isn't an experiment being conducted on the public. This isn't something that is coming into your community that people don't know how to deal with and don't know how to work with. We've been working with CO2 pipelines in the industry. We've been learning. We've been improving our performance for over 40 years. They're regulated the same as other highly dangerous, hazardous liquids. And I would just ask you to consider that when you make your decisions. So thank you for your time.
Any other opponents? All righty, so we've had about 45 minutes of testimony, almost from each side. At this point, I believe what I'm going to do is we're going to take a 10-minute break, give the commission a chance to think about everything that's been brought on, take care of whatever needs to be taken care of, and we'll come back, and at that point we'll start commission debate, and we will go into, oh, thank you. Got ahead of myself. We'll do that right after the rebuttals. So we have about 20 minutes for rebuttals from proponents of the ordinance. So thank you.
Good morning. Rick Bonander from Valley Springs. Commissioners, development decisions affect many of the things that touch people's lives every day. Their homes, their health, the schools their children attend, the taxes they pay, their daily commute, the natural environment around them, economic growth in their community, and the opportunities to achieve their dreams and goals. What, where, and how communities build what will affect their residents' lives for generations to come. Communities of all sizes are using creative strategies to develop in ways that preserve natural lands and critical environment areas, protect the water and air quality, and reuse already developed land. The high quality of life makes our communities economically competitive and creates business opportunities and strengthens the local tax base. This ordinance allows both pipeline companies to cross through Minnehaha County and collect the 45Q federal tax dollars. It also allows the ethanol companies to collect the Z45 federal tax dollars. This means there is no interruption in business. We are responsible property owners and citizens of Minnehaha County, and have always, even when we have disagreed, have always treated the Minnehaha County Commission and administration staff with respect. We therefore respectfully ask that you pass this ordinance that the Minnehaha County administration staff has drafted.
Thank you, Mr. Bonander.
Commissioners, I'm going to be speaking in rebuttal on behalf of a group of landowners. Do you want them to raise their hands, or if I'm just good to?
Okay. Thank you.
I'd like to speak to...
Chase, can you introduce yourself just again for the record?
Yes. My name's Chase Jensen. I'd like to speak to the comments that were made by the opponents, who shared a lot of things, not many of them germane to the ordinance on the table. The ethanol representatives that spoke at the beginning said a lot of things, and I think it's clear that they are interested in maximizing their profitability as an industry, which certainly makes sense for the roles that they have as CEO, as board members. They are not interested in considering the intelligent land use for the current and future development of Minnehaha County and its citizens' well-being, which is the role that you have been elected to. I'd like to speak to Mr. Godfrey's comments, gentleman from DNV, specifically the point, first of all, that the companies have not provided rupture modeling information, and then would fly in an expert consultant to say lots of things that's very hard to digest in this type of format on the final reading of an ordinance, to try and dissuade the county from doing any action without having provided any tangible information about the actual risks of a rupture for the company that he's consulting with. I think it's wild that the takeaway is, trust us, we will mitigate the threats, and we will not tell you what those threats are in any detail, but you can trust us. I'll also point out on his comments, he mentioned FAST modeling, which DNV developed in the 2020 rupture referenced in Satarsha, Mississippi. Part of the reason why the entire town had to be evacuated was because, as has come out in the report PHMSA issued after, is that the FAST modeling is not the gold standard for rupture modeling, and it did not accurately determine what the appropriate buffer zones or setbacks ought to have been. There are other modeling forms that can be used, and having studied in the humanities my whole life, I never would have thought I'd be delving into rupture modeling models and the differences between them, but there are higher standard modeling analyses that can be made. And so it's a red flag for me right away that they're mentioning that when that was the modeling used in Satarsha, which proved to be inaccurate in the actual effect of a rupture. A direct quote was that routes are chosen to minimize threats by, I believe, the navigator representative. And again, I would just point out their point is that we know there are risks, that there are threats, and we are going to decide what the appropriate setback is, what the appropriate route. And we're going to determine which threats are appropriate to put on the public, and we're not going to share with you information that would allow you, as our elected officials, to do that. Speaking to Mr. Eldridge's points with Summit, the safety regulations that were listed, I noticed there was quite a few things that weren't named. What weren't named were local county emergency response plans, construction rules, road haul agreements, setbacks, depth of cultivation, pipeline remediation, potential bonding so that pipelines can be paid for at the end of life. These are all things PHMSA does not do, which the county has legal jurisdiction to impose in the form of zoning ordinances. Many of those things are being left on the table in terms of the current ordinance, which has very few things within your jurisdiction that have been chosen to move forward. Another point is, as far as how many pipelines are in Harrisburg, maybe this is more of an aside, but I'm sure if we could have gone back 50 years, if people could have anticipated the explosion of growth in Harrisburg, that they would have had more forward-thinking, intelligent land use ordinances so that we didn't have so many pipelines we were building around. That's part of the long-term vision that this ordinance is considering, which we thank you for, and think you are fully within your rights to do. The comment in the form of a very not subtle threat of litigation that Summit Carbon Solutions believes PHMSA preempts siting is false. And I believe that you will begin to see counties who have moved lawsuits up to the federal courts to be thrown out. I believe you will soon see that the intimidation tactic of suing every local entity that wants to do something to encourage other counties to do nothing will soon start to fall apart as those are thrown out. I'm also sure that you are all intelligent enough to know that anytime somebody cherry picks one quote from a legal memo, that you may not be receiving the full complexities and nuances of that legal issue. Certainly there are counties that have taken action which may have overstepped a bound. We don't believe that your ordinance does that, and the fact that it was fully written within, in-house, internally, ensures that that was a consideration being taken. On the point that this ordinance is prohibitive, as the Planning and Zoning Director shared at the beginning, this is a multifaceted, nuanced ordinance that gives space for permitted special uses if those setback distances cannot allow for a pipeline to go through, for example, for the special environmental area that needs to be addressed, then it can be dropped down to a conditional use permit and can still move forward. Also, landowners can be approached, and since we've all heard so many times how much these companies would like to negotiate and avoid eminent domain and avoid all that drama, landowners can sign waivers. That's also in the ordinance as it stands. So I don't see how this would preclude any pipeline from coming forward in the future. It lays out clear rules of engagement, clear rules for how they are going to move in the county.
Chase, I'm going to interrupt you just for a minute. How many other people want to speak to the rebuttal? 1, 2? Okay, because we have about 10 minutes left, so, okay? So be cognizant other people would like to speak.
Thank you. The last couple points here would be, I think we heard the most alarming testimony from the last two speakers, which combined paint a pretty nerve-wracking picture. We heard from the DNV consultant that the reason that part of the issue with the rupture in Mississippi was that first responders were not informed about the dangers of CO2 ruptures. And so they went barreling into the situation, and that there was no communication between the company and the first responders. Well, we have the great benefit of having fire and first responders who do understand basic emergency response. And what we've heard from their mouth is that we know, and we don't want to be mischaracterized as being somebody who would drive straight into the plume. So we've heard the companies are going to communicate with our first responders. We've heard our first responders will not be entering into plumes, which means that whatever the emergency response zone is, there will not be an effort to go in there. It will be a recovery effort afterwards. And so your setback distance effectively is the only thing other than an emergency response plan, which is not available to the public, deciding how far back this is going to go from residences. The last point that I'll make here.
Is this your last point?
This is the last point, is we have all been trying to understand potential impact, and so we have put a map together to show This is the county map, and we have taken a plume model from a report, which is listed on the bottom of this, and I can hand this out, which was a 12.5-inch pipe, and the rupture distance, CO2, was picked up over around 4.5 miles, not quite 4.5 miles. So we've just charted that out, and it's kind of hard to see, but with the circle here, on the Summit route, which is not even a third of the volume that Summit's proposing, it would be a little larger than the volume Navigator is currently proposing. The red line that represents the Summit route here is scaled, and it represents 750 feet. This is the 4.5 mile coming from that report. We're not pipeline rupture experts, but we're saying that information ought to be given to give context to how insubstantial even 750 might be. So the thought that it may be lowered beyond that is preposterous, but this is the type of information that should be the burden of proof for the company to provide so that these siting guidelines can be developed, and it shouldn't be brought up and dismissed in a final hearing with experts that are flown in. Thank you.
Michael Stangland. I'm not here representing anyone, but I do stand with the people who are at risk of having their land taken, people who are at risk of being too close to these things, if something goes wrong. And I don't know the full details of all this, but based on what I do understand, it's my understanding that there's a lot of stuff covered in this. I mean, yes, it is about safety. Yes, it is also about public land. About intelligent public use. It's also about making sure that sometime down the road, we won't have a problem if the accident does happen, that there won't be anyone around to come in and handle the problem. And I think a big example of that recently, even though there's been an effort to forget about it, is the East Palestine thing where, it's a train incident, but I think the big case there is, the train the train accident, but the company behind it, wasn't there to do anything. They kind of tried to ignore it. And combined with that, there's talk about, there was one mention of, well, ethanol can't survive. It can't grow if it doesn't have this. And I think maybe that should say something about, maybe it's a sign. So that whole system needs to get a look at, needs to be examined, because much like everything else with that, everything about this pipeline comes down to federal government. Ethanol, people might not like to hear it, but ethanol as it exists because of federal government. This pipeline, it exists because of federal government. If the federal government wasn't mandating, wasn't putting federal money into it, there would be no pipeline. There would not be, best we can tell, ethanol would not be where it was if it was not for federal money. And there's also the intelligent land use. I'm trying to
wrap up your comments, sir.
Where the fact of the matter is, intelligent land use, if there comes a point, the other pipelines, oil, natural gas, they are, people use those. All of us use oil. A lot of people use natural gas. Who makes use of this carbon dioxide? And if the government wasn't involved, there'd still be markets for that. This, if the federal government sometime decided, look, we're gonna step away from this, where would the market be for that? And we'd still be stuck with it.
Thank you, Mr. Stengler.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Bruce Burkhardt. I live up by Del Rapids. I'm an affected landowner. And one rebuttal that I had was one of the opponents used the word arbitrary numbers. And when I applied for a confined animal feeding operation, I had numbers that I had to go by, and they were not arbitrary. And I think these numbers that your staff has put together as a decent, reasonable set of numbers, and I would sure encourage you to pass the current proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dennis Anderson, Valley Springs.
And I would like to comment on the welds. Welds rarely ever break. He stated that the pipe was too strong. What happens when you weld, the metal around it crystallizes and gets harder. And that's where the failure usually is in pipe. Just something for you to consider.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we're at the end of the 20 minutes here. I'll allow one more because you did raise your hand, sir, and this will be our last rebuttal comments.
John Sharda, Valley Springs. The gentleman from Del Rapids said he chose to get in his car and take a risk to come down here, so we should all be forced to have a pipeline within really close to our house. Also, we had a plume modeling expert here, so he's an expert in plume modeling, but had nothing to show us how the plume would be safe for us, which if it was, you'd think they'd be showing that. And also, I am a volunteer fireman from Valley Springs, and we sign up to help our neighbors and their houses on fire. They're having an emergency. We don't want to be helping out with this thing here. They said they're going to, give us instructions and training, but that's not what we signed up for. So, thank you.
Thank you. All righty. So now, what I said 20 minutes ago is what we're going to do. We're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll allow, when we come back, the commission to ask questions of our planning and zoning and possibly of some of you that testified. We will then, at that point, if there's any amendments to be made, we will take those and we will allow 10 minutes of public comment from each side. Okay? So we will take a 10-minute break. We'll be back here at 10:52. Call our meeting back into order. Thank you, everybody, for your civility through the process so far. I expect to maintain that. Since there are 4 commissioners, we just so you for how things will be. Thank you. Kim turned it off. Just appreciate your civility up to this point, and as I said, I really anticipate that you'll maintain that. Just kind of so you have an understanding if things look goofy up here. If as the chair, I cannot make a motion or a second, so if I wish to do that, I will hand the gavel off to Commissioner Benninga. He will then take the rest of that portion of the debate and then hand the gavel back to me. So just so you have an understanding of why or what we're doing, I guess. At this point, I will turn the debate and discussion over to the commission for them to ask questions, comment, and possible amendments. And I'll always look to my legal counsel if I miss something. And obviously, I have a lot of help up here, and I appreciate it. So thank you. So, commissioners.
Commissioner Karski.
Please.
Just a question. Do we have the ability to ask questions again of our staff, of Scott?
Yes.
Regarding, okay, good. And then I would just like to start by saying thank you to everybody who put so much time in. I know our planning and zoning office helped to draft this ordinance and spent a lot of time doing research. And then the state's attorney's office, scrutinized it to make sure that it was going to be the best it could be for us. And then with planning and zoning, with the planning commission, I should say, voting to support it. I really just want to say thank you because there are a lot of people smarter than me that were involved in drafting it, and it really gives me a lot of peace of mind knowing that we can support it just as it was written, knowing that we've really worked hard as a county to be able to make sure that it's a good compromise. And I think, to quote Carol, who quite often I've heard say a good compromise is when both sides are not happy. I think that's where we find ourselves. So that kind of is a guideline that I follow also, just to see, where we're at. And I did hear quite a few people say that 750 feet seems like an arbitrary number, and I just think with the amount of effort that went in from our different offices that were involved, I think we did a good job of trying to make it as unarbitrary as possible. I don't really think arbitrary is the word that we should use after it's been vetted by all these different different groups in our county. And I know we've all gotten a lot of feedback, a lot of comments from people, and I can share the concerns on both sides. I think the economic development, the thousands of jobs, the things like that the proponents of the pipeline mention are not things that we want to take lightly. Those are valuable contributions. And then those who have been opposed to the pipeline, have all kinds of different comments also that they've shared with us. Landowner rights, we heard a lot about rupture modeling and things like that. And I just keep coming back to, from what I can understand, our job is not to really take on any of those topics. I think, if I understand it correctly, the commission's job is to do the best job that we can to find how this should be allowed through the county. And I think to say that a 750-foot setback would preclude the pipeline is giving us probably too much credit. I think after looking at the maps and after the Planning and Zoning Office working with everyone on this, I do put a lot of my faith in what's been created. And I guess when we talk about the future of our county, we all know the growth that's anticipated. So I do think it's wise for us to take a long, hard look at how we want that growth to be developed. I don't know that we would want to limit areas like Hartford, for example. I know I heard a resident talk about how that could have a negative impact on the growth in that area. I also just wanted to mention that being a rural resident, we are pretty excited when property values go up, although that does inevitably mean taxes go up too. But I just think there's a good likelihood that having a CO2 pipeline near your property could scare off a potential buyer, which could have a negative impact on your property value. And so that's one factor that I do take into consideration when thinking about what the setback should be. So for those reasons, I think I would be very supportive and very appreciative again of the ordinance as it's written.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Kipler.
I got the pleasure of being on the center of quite a few of these debates now. I served on planning and zoning, and I think I can echo Commissioner Blyenberg's sentiments that we've all gotten an earful, or I think Chase might have said 2 ears full, so that's as many ears as I got. But I appreciate that. Want to thank staff for their work on this, and my fellow planning commission members. Took a lot of public input. I believe this is easily the number one issue since in our short time, Commissioner Blyenberg and I are new to this, but I thought this was probably the most constructive back and forth we've had in the months and months of feedback we've had. Of course, some hasn't been germane to our approach specifically in Minnehaha County or to the role of a county. So I kind of have been beating that drum for a while of just what our role is. I think that's an important element of our system of government and constitutional structure to understand. And I appreciate a few state legislators being in the room too and helping with their frame of reference and input. But our role is not related to eminent domain, tort liability or related insurance matters. That's for our friends in the state legislature. Our role is not to permit the pipeline in its nature as a pipeline, as that permitting process is with the state's Public Utilities Commission. In our role, I know one topic that came up quite a bit yet today was still safety concerns, and I think that's a natural human instinct, and that's going to be at least a sub-component of what we're talking about, even in a planning and zoning circumstance. But our role is really not to second guess any safety specifications of the pipeline, such as thickness of the pipe or its depth in the ground, and some other safety circumstances. That's left to the federal government and its Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. So what is our role? And our role as the county is firmly grounded in principles of traditional planning and zoning. So this involves considerations for future growth, land use, suitability for certain land use adjacent to other types of land use, et cetera. So as local leaders, I do believe we play an important role in aspects of routing that will make a substantial and essentially permanent impact on land in our county. So while ours is an important role, that doesn't necessarily require us to take up an adversarial role. I've sought some neutral principles and objective guidelines grounded in existing federal regulatory structure to try to keep us as neutral and not out to kill any particular project or take sides in this. I kind of felt my sentiments echoed by our state president of the firefighters, that maybe neither a proponent or opponent, but just trying to stick to good objective guidelines where we can. So with that in mind, just kind of tipping my hand a little bit, I do plan on offering 3 amendments to more narrowly tailor the process and the substance of the county's regulatory approach on these matters. I believe this is a good faith effort to work with the pipeline companies, both the current proposals and any future expansions of those proposals or future companies that would want to do similarly situated projects. So to work with them related to reasonable routing restrictions, which I believe is firmly within our, albeit limited, authority of planning and zoning. And I think that came clear. I think, just to speak more broadly, I think it's a fair assessment, and I think our friends that commented as opponents kind of are asking that existential question, that kind of a libertarian instinct of why any regulation at all. So why, especially on a setback, I think is the substance we're thinking about. So I do think, it fits within our role of planning and zoning. While this might not be new to the United States, it is novel to our area. It's when we talk about routing being one of our expert testimony, which I really appreciated that background. That was great testimony. But when you emphasize that routing is to address threats, I would kind of like the county to be have a seat at the table to have those discussions about, so what are the threats? How could we be helpful? How can we, as local leaders, talk about that? And you could see how a planning and zoning hearing could bring some of those things out, and there might be some value added to a process where you get to the opportunity to work with our great planning and zoning staff to work together on that. And then also the other lesson from we've heard a lot about the Satarsha, Mississippi incident, and again, a takeaway from that was public awareness. So I think the county being involved and being some kind of stakeholder puts that on the map of public awareness. And so I think that has an incidental effect of safety, but it just puts everyone in a position to be more successful. And so I can kind of talk through some of the elements here, as I want to give all my colleagues an opportunity to just give initial first impressions. But again, I'll summarize the ordinance in 3 component parts, and I'll have an amendment kind of tailoring each section a little bit more. But again, the 3 component parts would be, first, an application process for a permitted special use for hazardous material pipelines, with, second, a series of setback provisions that, if not met, trigger, third, a conditional use process with a fee structure. So I think we got pretty good feedback from the public on the ordinance as drafted, and I think, Mr. Chair, you were kind enough, I think, to offer the opportunity to potentially give feedback on any specific amendments offered. But with that, I think that's kind of my initial initial thoughts as we get started in this, but I want to give everybody a chance to give their initial thoughts before I propose a First Amendment.
Well, since I'm the last one before it goes to the chair, I've been around for a long time, so I like short and sweet. Maybe not always sweet, but I do like short. And I'm thinking you get paid by the hour right now. He has a legal background, so I understand that. I really appreciate the fact that we had so much input into this process. Most of the time it was very professional, and I appreciate that a lot because we all have experienced differences on occasion. But the legal support we got from the state's attorney's office, from the staff who did a tremendous amount of work, planning and zoning, it's been a process that we've all learned from, I think, and I appreciate the fact that you all are in attendance today. You're not all going to be happy. That's not our job, is to make everybody happy. Our job is to do the right thing at the right time. We don't know what the future holds for everything we've done in the past, and when we have new commissioners in the future, they may change some of the stuff that we've already put in place. So with that, I'll say thank you for being here. We'll go through the process and hopefully make at least 51% of you happy.
Optimistic.
I am.
Yeah, and I've heard from emails and texts from legislators, state senators, state legislators that are both for and against. So this is a very complex process, and it's not black and white in my mind. So a lot of these things are probably my opinion. So I am open to the discussion on amendments. I think it's important that we at least hear them and discuss them and hear the pros and cons of them. So I am open to hearing the amendments that Commissioner Kipley may propose. I don't know if I'll be in favor of them or not, but I am in favor of hearing them and at least having the discussion on them. One question did come up, and Scott, there you are. The question is, what is the current setback? I mean, what exists right now for any guidelines on what could be done?
Thank you. So to answer that, right now, it's not addressed in the zoning ordinance. So it would fall back to any federal regulations, and I believe it's a 50-foot setback. I think that PHMSA guidelines would fall into standard, and they would need to meet any federal requirements and federal setbacks.
So federal law is the default at this
Yes.
point. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions of staff or any of the people that gave testimony or public comment?
I have a question, Commissioner.
Commissioner Bleinberg.
Thank you. Commissioner Kipley, I think when we discussed your amendments, there were, in the setbacks, there were 2 different points, and I'm wondering if we could potentially discuss them separately. Would you be opposed to that, or would that
I would be open to that if it facilitates better discussion and isolating in on what issues we're in agreement or not in agreement. I'm happy to itemize them rather than bundling them, not necessarily. So I'm open to that. I was going to go just to walk you through if you have any other suggestions. Would, again, the first element of the ordinance is the application process. So I had an amendment on that. And then second was the setback distance itself and the measurement thereof. We could separate those into 2 and 3 as needed. And then fourth was an element of the fee structure on conditional use permit. So if that gives you a sense, we can just take them one at a time and see where we end up. If we need to bifurcate them or not, we can deal with that as we go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sounds good to me. Okay. So with that, I think unless we have other questions, we can go into proposed amendments to the ordinance.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I guess staff was helpful in drafting these amendments for me, and I think we're going to help. Let's see, this is, start with number 1. Eric will help me. I kept a copy. So we'll distribute those to my colleagues here first, and we should have some for the audience, and then Tyler, I'll put you on the spot if maybe we can get one up on the screen, because I don't think we have enough copies for everybody. Can we do the Elmo? The Elmo? Yeah, Eric, we'll get you a copy. And so again, a couple of these are more procedural. I'm guessing, as Commissioner Blyenberg kind of tipped her hand to, of we might have more discussion and substance on either the measurement of the setback or the setback number itself, but thought we'd kick off the process. And again, the spirit of this First Amendment is, again, not to, again, I think I'm coming back to this concept that we have an important role, but it's not necessarily an adversarial role with any business or project trying to come into our area, but we have a duty to the general public and a duty to the citizens of Minnehaha County to assert what authority has been granted to us as Minnehaha County Commission and our planning and zoning authorities. So this is just comes in some conversation with just the practicalities. I think we have two examples between the Summit proposal and the Navigator proposal that going through a pretty arduous process with, we've got 2 pages there, Tyler, so I appreciate you navigating us through here. So the proposal ends up being a pretty long and arduous process to go through the PUC, and we're not trying to put up, again, arbitrary barriers for a pipeline proposal, but again, trying to get to that point where we can have a seat at the table on issues like routing and have some input with the project to nudge them along the way that, hey, this might be a good routing decision, or we need this information. And the way this is written currently isn't necessarily a bad way to do it, but it was largely basically immediately after you file with the PUC, we want a document dump, and I just didn't see that as practical to our planning staff. And also, some of this information will be duplicative with either going to our highway superintendent related to information map identifying entry into the county's right-of-ways, et cetera. The PUC docket, as I think a lot of the people in this audience are very familiar with, it being available online. Do we really need them to print that out and document dump it on us? Or and then probably most importantly, it's an evolving process. When we would ask 7 days after the PUC filing to have a document showing the center line, I think that's just, again, trying to be a good faith negotiator and to work with the pipeline companies that they're going to be able to give us a corridor of here's where we're thinking we're going. But that, I think it kind of starts us off on the wrong foot, such that it gives this amendment then changes that amount to 30 days after the PUC filing, lets us digest what the project is, and basically just ask for a letter of intent. You intend to come through our territory of Minnehaha County, and then it empowers the planning director, puts the ball in his court to then ask for the documentation that's relevant at the time, and makes that more of a dialogue and a conversation. And that's the spirit of how I would want to approach these negotiations, and dealing with good faith negotiation on both sides to try to get to the more substantive items, which will come later on, trying to put some teeth into it of, we would like you to route it in a certain way with certain setbacks. I think this is an application process that gets us on the right foot, but largely this is, again, procedural. Finally, if we turn to the next page, after, again, just the amendments there, what we've covered so far is just the days, a written intent, and kind of pivoting the duty onto the planning director to request what documents are necessary in that list. And then finally, we just note that, again, this is not meant to be an arbitrary delay on the project. If anything, we note that we will make a determination if this meets all the setbacks and then any other substantive requirements and qualifies as a special permitted use, or if it needs to be a CUP, a conditional use permit process, at least in no event more than 30 days after they would receive PUC approval, so not looking to arbitrarily delay the project. And then if in that interim time while we're studying the issue, the PUC would deny such a permit, that would essentially kill the application, as it would be a requirement of any PUC, any conditional use permit that they have the PUC permit. So it would kind of defeat itself. But again, just another sign of good faith that we will review this with all due diligence, and it's not going to be a situation where the planning director just sits on it and doesn't request any information. But no, we will be working with due diligence and trying to come to a conclusion on whether this meets all the setbacks, other special permitted use criteria. So that's kind of my proposal, and I guess be open to any questions about the amendment, or do we need a formal motion and second to get it on the floor for discussion?
We do, but I guess I'd take questions first.
Questions from the commission?
Please.
Can you help me understand, Commissioner Kipley, the difference? Could you define the difference between the letter of intent and an application? What would be the change that you're looking for?
Really, because I've taken a lot of the substance out of the application, since I'm not asking them to submit any of these forms, because I find they're largely premature. Like, if you're not going to have a center line, I think it's kind of odd to ask for them to give us a routing information with a center line. It's kind of just setting the back and forth up for failure at the outset, but basically just put us on notice, a letter of intent. This is what we plan to do. Here is a reference to that we've submitted documents with the PUC, which would give broader context. So just say we intend to come into Minnehaha County, then that puts the ball into our court, and our planning director can then go down that list and ask for the items and create more of a dialogue. I've just seen more success. This is, again, the kind of practical local feel that goes on here, that I think I've seen more success on people bringing forth proposals to our staff when it's kind of a dialogue and a back and forth, rather than, again, maybe our word of the day of an arbitrary list of, we're going to say you need to provide these things, even though it's not really ripe yet in the process. And if anything, I'd like to, that's been kind of the trouble with some of this process here, is we're coming in, I would reject the notion that we're changing the rules in the middle of the game, but that we are coming in late to a process that would have been ideal if we had had this in place earlier on to start that dialogue. Instead, I feel like we're kind of coming to a point where some of that general routing process has already been baked into some degree, and now we're playing defense rather than being a constructive player at the outset. So I know I've went on a little bit, and Commissioner Benningo will give me a hard time here. But largely, it's just that the letter of intent, as opposed to a substantive application, is just the distinction of just putting the company or the applicant, putting us on notice of their intent to go through the special permitted use process, and then we then would have the burden to ask for the information about the routing process, have that dialogue, that conversation, and see if they meet it or not. Is that helpful?
It is. Thank you. And this is just our time for questions. Okay.
I guess my question, Commissioner Kipley, is under Section B, at the request of the planning director. It seems like we're giving a lot of discretionary authority to the planning director. Wouldn't that be best if that information was provided with the full knowledge that, this is just a plan, and plans are always subject to change?
I'm open to other theories of how we would approach this. I'd be open to Scott's feedback too, as we're kind of placing some duty on him to request. I guess I'm coming at it from the perspective of a lot of this information is going to change over time too. So I think there's going to be, they might be able to throw a lot of stuff at us at the beginning, and I don't want to get whitewashed with paper of like they just dump a lot on us, but certain things are going to evolve, like the PUC docket evolves over time, and this allows basically us to say, here is what we need, and we can kind of start off the conversation, is the framework I'm looking at. I just think we can put anything on a piece of paper to say we will demand this information, but if the information doesn't exist or it's always a moving target, it won't solve all the problems.
If I may. Yeah, because even B1, all required forms prescribed by the planning director. Again, it's leaving a lot of authority in the hands of the planning director. And maybe that's clearly where it should be. I don't know if that clearly is the right word, but I guess from my perspective as a commissioner, when I'm reviewing these types of requests, sometimes what isn't given to me is, that blank spot that I'm, what you don't know, and the questions that should be asked don't get asked because of that lack of knowledge. So I would prefer that even if we get whitewashed, at least I know it's there and I can look for it. So if you were to propose this amendment, I would ask that you remove at the request of the planning director from B.
Yeah, I'm open to that, and like you said, within B1, all forms prescribed by the planning director. So the planning director still does have authority to ask for additional information or create forms of here's the initial information we need off the bat. And I think, again, at the local level, there's some reasonable back and forth on all types of applications that we receive. There's always a dialogue back and forth. People create site plans for different things, and then it evolves and it changes. So I'm open to that. I think with that feedback, if there are any other questions, I'll make a motion that I think is going to be amenable. I'll move what we see on the screen as Amendment JK-01 without striking that addition of at the request of the planning director. And then the rest of that amendment would stand. So that is my motion.
I'll second that so I don't end up with a gavel.
So we have a motion and a second. I will, any other comment from the commissioners?
Yes, I have a question. Commissioner Kipley, I think you said that someone in the office or in the county helped create this, the amendments that you're proposing?
Sure, just to the extent, just to be clear, just to the extent of it's all my language and just we had legal staff form it into the form of an amendment with the stricken and addition words, but I'm not proclaiming that this has the complete buy-in of all staff or whatnot.
Okay.
Substance but not form, or form but not substance.
Yes, that's fair.
Yeah, I should have asked that more specifically. I guess I just wanted to make sure, because like I had said earlier, I really felt like the ordinance as it stood was very well scrutinized. And so I'm just curious if these amendments have been scrutinized also by the state's attorney's office or planning and zoning, if they're in line with what we would like to adopt. I guess I don't know if that's a question for the state's attorney.
Any comments from planning and zoning?
Well, first of all, I appreciate the work the state's attorney's done to put us in this format and to review it. And I have reviewed this just at the meeting now, and I don't see any issue. I think that the changing from 7 days to 30 days is probably a good idea. It gives us a little bit more time to work with applicants or the project managers or project personnel. So I think it's good.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Commissioner?
Yes. Should we check with the state's attorney to make sure that it's?
I don't want to put him too much on the spot on giving a legal opinion, but if the state's attorney has any comments, now would be the time to make them.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate Commissioner Kipley's clarification, because I did not review these for substance. I just put them in form so that it was digestible as an amendment. Most of the question is really an issue of policy. My only concern is very limited, and that's I believe some ambiguity as to what a letter of intent versus an application is and how that applies for the mechanics of this process. That may be clearer to the commission than it is to me at this particular moment. But other than that, I really would not want to start becoming the now missing fifth commissioner and start commenting on the policy aspects. So,
thank you, sir. All righty. Okay.
Are you comfortable with?
Well, if you're comfortable, I'm. Yeah. So we'll now open it up to 10 minutes of public comment from the proponents, and it'll be the same proponents. Whether you like this amendment or not, you would still be the proponent. So we have 10 minutes, and please, 3 minutes of time per. Anybody have any comments? This is mostly, like I said, a form versus substance. Well, I guess some substance, so please.
Good morning. My name is Linda Nichols. My address is Hartford, South Dakota. I first want to thank you guys for all your time, planning and zoning, state's attorney, everybody. I agree with how this was put together. I thought it was put together very well. With this amendment, what I was looking at, kind of what the state's attorney alluded to, a letter of intent as opposed to an application. Is that going to give you enough information? The information is really not burdensome. The information's already there. They have it. I kind of agree with the timeline with that, but they already have the information. Why would we change that? And I kind of get hung up on that letter of intent also, like an application. Wouldn't we want to know that information? Like if there is a threat, to me that is grave information that you guys should know. So I think a letter of intent is kind of, I don't know, it's not, to me you want more information than what is there. So to me an application would be appropriate. So thank you.
Any other from proponents?
Dennis Jones, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Under B, number 3 and 4, says a map identifying each entry into.
Please speak into the microphone, please.
Yes. Can you hear me now? Okay. Number 3, under B, a map identifying each entry into the county's right-of-way and each proposed crossing of a county road or other county property. And number 4, a map and a listing containing the names and addresses of all affected property owners. Right now, I don't think they even have a map that addresses that right today. We can't get a identification from them exactly where they're going to put it. It just says, sign this easement and we'll put it where we want to put it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Any other proponent comments? Seeing nobody rushing, I will open it up to the opponents. Opponent testimony on this proposed amendment.
Hi, Monica Howard with Navigator again. I think this speaks a little bit to the fact where I was talking about the hierarchy of permitting and reflects a necessary gap. So I do want to make it very clear that the state code requires us to send you the application that's on file with the PUC. And so hard copies of that is provided upon our submittal to the PUC. It also already comes to the county. Some of the information, just to kind of explain why it's premature a little bit to have it, within 7 days or possibly even 30 days, but I respect the edit as it's provided. As far as identifying the center line and have it surveying by an RPL, a registered land surveyor within that amount of time. So when we submit to the PUC, we still have a corridor that we're looking at permitting, that we're routing and siting within, such that if we identify a new house that a landowner's building, we might have to move it, out of that way or something like that. So to be providing specific centerline information and where we're going to cross those roads and those things is really premature at that phase of the PUC process. And so we kind of, like I explained, go through state permitting, and then it comes down to the local level to get those road haul agreements, road crossing agreements, and those types of things. So in that regard, I understand that. And we are in the industry, in development, we're familiar with letters of intent, and it's just a prescribed letter of we acknowledge what you have, we intend to follow something, we intend to follow up with you at the appropriate time, and it's an acknowledgement or that process will be followed, so that's not foreign to those of us in the industry. and also appreciate the comments on the eighth. Or did we get to the second page? Is it the whole thing or just, okay. Just the timeliness and understanding of the review and approval process is also appreciated for the closeout of that permit. Thank you.
May I ask you a question?
Yes.
So is it my understanding that the letter of intent that you would submit would include the application to the PUC? Is that the standard way that things would be done?
It's usually a reference to a code or the ordinance itself saying that, kind of like an FYI letter. We also send a cover letter when we send you a copy of the hard copy that the application that goes on file with the PUC. So it'd be a second letter to that or a piece of that where it would acknowledge the ordinance that you have and our intent to apply for it at that time, and that here is a copy of the docket as filed, probably with a link to the website, because the PUC is very orderly about having everything, all the updates, any questions they ask, if we need to update a map or anything, it all goes right onto that docket. So just be an acknowledgement that here's where we are in the process, and here's where we intend to go with you, knowing that you have an ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Other opponent testimony? Okay, I'll give chance for rebuttal, a couple of minutes. Any rebuttal? All righty. Discussion from the commission.
Mr. Chair, I don't really have anything else to add. I just think this is, again, has become a highly contentious issue in our community, and trying to just project forward as any of these things would come up again, trying to get our local planning and zoning staff to be able to assert our authority that I think we have, but to do that in a way that gets us off on the right foot of reasonable, good faith conversations with the project applicant.
Okay, thank you. So before I call for a vote, any other comments? Sorry.
No.
Okay. So before I call for a vote, so nobody thinks I'm making up rules as I go along, what we will do is we will have a vote, and if this fails 2-2, theoretically or in reality, I could postpone the rest of the hearing until the June 6th commission meeting. At the discretion of the chair, I have decided that if this should fail, we will hear the other amendments and go through each one. Some may fail, some may succeed. But it would delay the final vote to the June 6th meeting, unless I miss something. Okay, so just so you know, we will have a vote on this. If it succeeds, we will move on, or fails, we will move on. If it fails, the final vote will only come at the June 6th meeting. So I will look for a roll call vote on the motion as it's presented.
Chairman,
Aye.
I'm sorry to
What's
interrupt.
that?
I apologize. I just wanted to clarify if we had removed that.
At the request of the plan. Yes, that has been removed.
Okay.
That was my motion. Thank you.
Kipley.
Aye.
Benega.
Aye.
Bleinberg.
Aye.
Karski.
Aye. Motion to amend carries. We'll move on to the next motion.
Let's see. So, Eric, Tyler can help me out again. We've got Amendment 2, which I don't know if you need. The amendment that Tyler's going to display is Amendment JK-02. I think I'm going to take Commissioner Bleinberg's point and probably, as we get to a formal motion, maybe at least divide this into two. But we can just digest where we're coming from here, because I think we've got, two moving pieces, and especially as Mr. Chair is allowing us to take all these amendments one by one and get through them today, regardless of the outcome, I think it's worth probably separating these and seeing where we all stand. So as it stands now, in one amendment, it's got two concepts here, is the setback itself, and I think I might start with actually the second element here is the measurement of separation. I think we've all just kind of been throwing numbers about, and I think it's important, especially when we talk about like the application and the center line, measuring from that to another point. It's important to clearly define what that other point is. And to this point, our initial draft had the separation distance set forth in the table above there is measured from that center line of the proposed pipeline to the closest parcel boundary of a use referenced in that table. So we can imagine in rural settings, we're going to have a home or a dwelling that is going to be set back itself on a parcel line some number of feet, even 1,000 feet. So then we get de facto into a place where even the 750 just becomes too high of a measurement to be sustainable within the parameters of, again, we'll talk about different federal regulations and the regulatory structure. Where do we truly have authority? So to tighten that up, and I think just to be more clear about what we're measuring, and when we're trying to provide some either protection is one element, but again, safety isn't the primary goal, maybe an incidental goal of planning and zoning, but just to that land use, what is it? Is it a residential use? Are we zoning it for light industrial? Are we what is going to go into this area in the future for future growth? I would just say this is a better way of measuring that. And then if I could, I guess I'll just speak to both elements and we can take feedback on both, but we can still make the motion separately. So the 330 feet, an amendment that would bring that down from 750 to 330. Some of that, and again, I'd reference an emergency response book for my friend, the president of the Firefighters Association. So I've gotten the honor of hanging out with some of the Fire Chiefs Association here in the county, and we attended one training put on by the Navigator Project that had these books and talked about different separation that obviously I think, again, back to good faith conversation among local leaders here, we're the pipeline company, none of us want to be close. I mean, ideally, I think in an ideal world, they want to have some good separation. And sometimes that's just not possible, or there's other circumstances where obviously they plug into the ethanol plant itself. So there's going to be circumstances where obviously they come within certain distances, and they kind of used a rule of thumb in that conversation of training that 300 to 400 feet, we want to follow that. And I did a little bit of my own digging into this manual and looked up what compressed carbon dioxide for our emergency management professionals that are coming across the scene. What would you contain the scene to? What would you evacuate? So an immediate precautionary measure would be to isolate or evacuate 100 meters or 330 feet. So that, to me, when it's coming from PHMSA, especially if we're trying to follow a federal regulatory scheme, not add on top of it or make something that is arguably arbitrary in a number, being tied to the federal regulatory scheme and saying 330 feet, it gives us the circumstance of why do we want to regulate this at all? If so, 330 feet gives us a radius that we know anything that moves into it in the future gets a building permit, or we want to request new zoning to be near that. I think one analogy is the idea of railroads got brought up a little bit, and I think there's maybe arguments on both sides of this, but I don't necessarily see this as something that will constrain or kill economic development, and no one wants to be near a pipeline. Some entities will want to be near that pipeline. And so that's the trade-offs and the different land use arguments we're going to have to take, is creating a buffer zone that's reasonable, tied to a federally regulated structure. I think this is eminently defensible. And then within that 330 feet, about a football field buffer zone, maybe we want to welcome new businesses to Minnehaha County that want to be near the pipeline, want to tap into it. So providing a buffer zone, and happy to hear my colleagues' input on that. I just think my other point would be on the 750, and especially as measured currently The map that Scott showed there is just, I think, going to be on the verge of unworkable. So I think we need one or both of these amendments. I've bundled them together because I think we need both. But I think that gets my thoughts on the table. Happy to hear my colleagues.
Okay, questions from commissioners of Mr. Kipley? I guess mine, if give somebody else a chance to jump in after mine, but I fully understand, when we talk about the setback being from a property line, there can be a lot of, I guess, wiggle room, because one structure might be 200 feet from the property line and another one might be 10 feet from a property line. So, I mean, especially for dwellings, churches, and businesses, for the measurement to be from the structure would seem to make more sense and be more consistency in our ordinance, that the boundary be from the structure, not from the property line. When we're talking public parks, schools, municipalities, from the boundary line, to me, makes some sense. I think I understand your argument for the 330 feet, that it's kind of already in federal standards. I don't know if it's regulations or not. I'm open on that for discussion, so I'd like to hear more talk about it, but I'm for certain on the measurement of separation, where that measurement begins, I am fully in favor of that. Any other questions?
I'm just not sure if it's questions or comments.
Comments, questions?
Okay,
Yeah, what you
great.
might, if you were to approve this as it is, or what you might like to see as far as changes to it.
I guess I like the idea of looking at them separately. And to the point about where to measure, I think that when somebody makes an investment in an acreage or in a farm or property outside of town, that investment is not just in the house. If it was, they would live in town. So that whole parcel is the purchase. And I know from my personal experience, when we bought our first acreage, we purchased an additional 5 acres with the option to build there later and live in the smaller, older house in the meantime. And I think that's a relatively common practice, that you see people buy the land for the land with the intent to build somewhere else on the property later. We all know the eligibility restrictions. So I think a lot of times it doesn't have to do with the eligibility. It has to do with the location, maybe the school district, for me, the trees in the area, and then we, project where we would like to build down the road. So I feel like measuring from the parcel line would do a service to the people who have spent the money on those parcels as opposed to a lot.
Commissioner Benega.
Well, I would agree with what Commissioner Bleinberg said about the property line. Frankly, I think the 750 feet is a reasonable setback. That is one that we presented to the community in all the conversations that have been brought up today. They use that number. I think in an act of good faith, they've made some concessions. I think that's the number we should use. I think it's something that if the feds have a problem with, we'll hear from them, but I'm willing to move on with the 1,000 or the 750 on this particular description.
Okay. Other comments?
Yeah,
Look for a motion.
I can
Commissioner
just make
Kipley.
a quick response there. So some of the structure, again, came from, we basically stole this table straight from the CAFO regulations. So that's where we got the rows and picked slightly different numbers and whatnot. But the measurement of separation comes from there too, where I think what you're getting at, Commissioner Bleinberg, is just the kind of traditional use and enjoyment of the land. How are you using the land? And you're using all of it. So when you're protecting against odors, smells, sights, CAFO, you want to, again, protect the use and enjoyment of, can you go out into your front yard and have a cup of coffee in the morning, or are you right across the street as the noxious smells of a CAFO? Those are some of the considerations there. Really, This here, I mean, it's even a little bit of a marginal call as the land use involved is it's under the ground. There's no site issue. Really, the only thing you're concerned with is the leak, eruption, emission, and that is where I'm tying to 330 feet. But again, that would only affect your use and enjoyment of the land if we take that literally by those federal standards. If your house is again set back even further from the parcel line, then the people responding, you're out of the evacuation zone. So I guess if you just take some of these federal standards in their literal form and that we're doing our best to kind of follow and regulate within our span of control, if you will, a dwelling that the parcel line happens to be 750 or in my case 330 feet away, but then the dwelling is another 300 feet back, which is common in a rural area. I mean, these are big parcels of land. So I think it becomes, again, kind of an arbitrary use of our authority when I think maybe that's the only other thing I'd ask before we make maybe a couple motions and make a couple votes on this. Scott, could we pull up that map again that showed, because I think we clarified that is 750 feet and by parcel line. So it would reflect the ordinance as currently existing. If we can back that out to the county level and just take a look at that, you'll see some kind of, obviously if it was pinpointed to the residents, you would imagine it being a perfect circle. Some of those are oblong
That's
shapes
correct.
or a little bit odd corners, so that reflects the parcel line. So that's fine. That just is what it is. But I look at this map and just don't feel like I could sit down or Scott could sit down and take that application from the pipeline company and have a reasonable conversation of, oh yeah, you just move here or move there. I think that's going to be a very difficult task, or at least it would basically automatically kick the whole process to a conditional use permit, which I think defeats some of our structure and initial effort to make this at least kind of hold out that incentive that if you work with us, this could be a special permitted use and you could get through. But that's kind of my 2 cents on and where I'm coming from with both of those changes would reduce those blue circles.
Yeah, we can, and maybe it'll be helpful if you'd like to look at a specific township like Wall Lake. Maybe that would be helpful. So why don't we scroll through? Wall Lake's going to be sort of towards the bottom because it's one of the last townships, but
there it was.
so this would be, for example, Wall Lake, showing that that 750 foot from the parcel. If you go back up, once you scroll up one, Trish, that would be, just a second, that would be, what was, that's the Red Rock. So it shows you Valley Springs, because this is sort of another area. I mean, we're talking 2 different pipelines, but this is maybe the other pipeline route. It would show you the setback from Brandon, from Valley Springs, and then the additional setbacks from residences and other churches. So.
Chairman Karski.
Commissioner, I'm going to leave it to Kipley for right now. Commissioner?
Are you ready for a motion? If she's got a
Not yet,
comment. Let's
if
have her comment, and then I'll make my motion.
Okay.
Sure. I know we also have 10 minutes of input from each side. Is that before or after?
After the motion.
Okay, got it.
So.
So I guess taking our thoughts and our feelings out of it, I would just, again, rely on the work that was put in by planning and zoning when they created the ordinance at the 750 feet setback from the parcel line. I think from what I understand, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that map is what we started with when we determined the 750. And I think that if the Planning Commission and the state's attorney's office scrutinized it and have decided that it's a defensible and a wise move. I'm not willing to second guess that. I would be in favor of keeping it to measuring from the parcel line and at 750 feet.
Okay. I guess my only question is, Commissioner Kipley, would you consider making your motion without the last sentence of paragraph D that you added?
To clarify, your question is, would I consider not having a change in the measurement methodology?
Correct.
Just to keep
But
it as it is.
the measurement itself that you're proposing of 330 feet, but leaving the measurement from the property line, property boundary.
I'm willing to separate them to create a vote to give clarity to where we all are on that idea, but I would be a yes vote on both, in the sense of amending. So I'm happy to.
I'm
break
tipping my
apart.
hand a little bit, so I'll just let you make that decision.
Okay. Well,
I'll let you make a motion.
Yeah, let's get to the motions here. So I will. You know what? Okay. I will make a motion for the amendment on just for now the D, the measurement of separation, and that addition of the last clause in Part D.
One more time. I want to clarify that I understand your motion.
My motion is an amendment for the measurement of separation, Part D, adding the red underlined language there.
So you're including it or you're not including it? I apologize for my...
I am including the red change there, just the change to the measurement of separation.
So, but not including the 330 feet?
No, we'll deal with that one separately.
Okay, so the motion is to amend the ordinance to change the methodology for measurement from the structure, not from the property line.
Correct, that's my motion.
Okay, I'm gonna let that motion die for lack of a second.
All right, then we will make a motion to change the setback distance for dwellings, churches, and businesses from 750 to 330 feet.
I'll second it just for conversation, so you have to keep the gavel.
All righty, so we have a motion and a second to change the setback to 330 feet for our dwellings, churches, and businesses, and it's 330 feet from the property boundary. So we have a motion and a second. Any other questions or discussion from the commission?
This is a good lesson in Robert's rules for me. Do we need to have public input on each of the two separately, or do we take
No,
them both?
because the first one died for lack of a second, so we only have one motion, and it is on the distance of measurement from the property boundary.
Okay, thank you. And do we have a moment for comment on that specifically, or is that?
If you would hold your comment until we take public comment, is that okay? Okay. So now we have 10 minutes of public comment from proponents of the ordinance. So we have a proposed change for setback at 330 feet. So I'm going to ask you to limit again to about 3 minutes.
Kay Burkhart from Valley Springs. Just one comment is, are we all aware that PHMSA is meeting on May 31st to June 1st for input in Des Moines, Iowa, to create new rules for CO2 pipelines? If I understood right, Commissioner Kipley is making his numbers off of the PHMSA rules, and what if those numbers change? I have no idea what they're doing. If they change and this pipeline is put in the ground, then do we desert that pipeline and start a new one? Just some questions for making those regulations.
Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Joy Hone from Hartford. And the county planning and zoning staff are experienced with ordinances that have proven to be effective in upholding county goals of current and future best land use. The planning and zoning staff, along with the state's attorney, have developed a CO2 pipeline ordinance containing a setback of 750 feet. This setback is not arbitrary. It is a result of careful consideration. The setback allows a defensible pathway for CO2 companies to build pipelines while also giving consideration to landowners. Once in the ground, the pipes do not just go away. There are permanent above-ground effects. The pipeline companies have described a vigorous inspection schedule, which includes flyovers, aerial drone monitoring, inspectors walking or driving through the easement right away on a regular basis. The further away from homes and businesses that the easements are, the better it is for everyone. Much like CAFO setbacks that are designed to protect better aesthetics for sight and smell, and wind tower setbacks for noise, CO2 setbacks are needed to protect our county citizens from intrusions on privacy. This is a very real aspect of quality of life, security, and protection of rural land and home values. An attractive, well-rounded community has a variety of quality living options. This has nothing to do with the ethanol companies or prohibiting these pipelines from coming through the county. This ordinance should not be looked at in a way of being exclusionary. It is about intelligent land use. The pipeline companies can negotiate in good faith. They can be a good neighbor. All along, they said that they want to work with landowners, like Mr. Todd Brown. He had the choice. He had the ability to make the choice to work with them. The pipeline companies say that they want 100% voluntary easements. They can negotiate and bring forth a variance or a waiver to the county. At the minimum, we are asking that you please pass this ordinance. This is the largest and longest CO2 pipeline ever built in the United States. Mr. Godfrey from DMV, from my understanding, Summit and Navigator have not provided plume modeling or dispersion analysis. The burden of proof should be on the companies. Mr. Godfrey should be providing that information to you guys, along with the pipeline companies. Personally, myself and the majority of the constituents from Minnehaha County in this room would like to see higher setbacks. This is intelligent land use in the fastest growing county in the state, and they still refuse to show us plume modeling. After reviewing the modeling and analysis, then you can lower the setbacks. But please, for the citizens of our county, consider a 1,500-foot setback like Brown County, or at least 1,000-foot. We really thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Joy.
And I know Chase Jensen's going to speak after me.
Scott Montgomery, Fairview, South Dakota. I was here and testified before the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I can't understand where they come up with a 750, let alone a 330. You take dwellings, churches, businesses. The only one that wouldn't apply of populations less than 500 where you're requiring a 2,640 foot. I mean, you have churches that have populations of 500 at times. Why are we not applying the same rules here? Another thing I'd like everyone in this room to do, to go home and take a plastic bag and put over your head. Snuff it up tight. See how far you can run with that, because that's what carbon dioxide does. It removes the oxygen. See how far you can run. Can you run 750 feet? Can you run 330 feet? Can you get away from this? I don't think so. Thank you very much.
I'm going to remind everybody, if you haven't signed in, please sign in so we have your information for public record.
Thank you. Commissioners, Chase Jensen, once again. As far as the point of businesses that would like to locate closer to the pipeline, there's already a mechanism within your ordinance that allows them to waive their right. I don't see why you would strip a setback that would affect everybody else who may not want to be that close, just in order to do something that could already be done. As far as we can tell, one of the main determinants in developing the setback was that it would not prove to be prohibitive, and so clearly there's legal reason to believe the 750 is defensible. The county has also clearly and explicitly not used safety considerations in the development. So I'm just struggling to understand how using a PHMSA regulation on an emergency evacuation zone clears that standard, but rupture modeling doesn't. That doesn't make any sense to me. I've also looked at that document that PHMSA put out, and there's no distinction between source of CO2, volume of CO2. I would cast serious doubt that whatever that regulation is, it's talking about high pressure CO2 pipelines, which can vary in both PSI, can also vary in length, size of pipe. There's no way that a regulation would be stuck 330 that would apply from everything from a refrigerator in the basement of a restaurant that leaks to a potential rupture of a 20-mile section of a 24-inch pipeline under 21 PSI. It's mind-boggling. So I don't think that there's any firmer foundation on the number 330 if it's tied to that than what you already have is a reasonable 750 that was developed and is defensible.
I see two people in line, so I'm going to ask you to limit your time to 2 minutes, if you don't mind, and then we're going to move on to the opponent testimony.
Michael Stanglin. Now, my understanding is that this 330 is determined by, well, that's what this federal government agency says is good. The problem with that is that, one, I think we've seen in recent history that, federal government guidelines are not really instinctively the best option to go with. This is also the same federal government that is the reason this pipeline that happens, that kind of wants the pipeline to happen. So my thinking is going with the idea of, well, this is what the federal government says. If it's good enough for the federal government, it's good enough for us, is very much a short-sighted approach to the situation.
Gary Miner. In my previous statement, I said anybody who had the guts to lower this better be able to look at the landowners in the eye and tell them that they were simply collateral damage. I know we're supposed to stick to the facts, not emotion, but I'm way past emotion. You might as well spit in our face. Do you know that this 24-inch pipeline at a 20-mile span for shutoff valves carries 8 million cubic feet of liquid? When a liquid turns to gas, it expands 535 times. That means there will be 4,280,000,000 cubic feet of gas coming over or moving across the ground. You might as well make that 3 feet as 330. I am asking you all to please reject this. This is just plain an insult.
Okay. Testimony from opponents.
Thank you, Commissioners. Aaron Eldridge, Summit Carbon Solutions again. Real brief, just on behalf of Summit Carbon Solutions, we oppose this amendment not specifically due to the merits of the amendment itself, but rather in opposition to the ordinance as a whole and any amendments pertaining to that, as we believe this is preempted by federal law. So for the sake of time, I don't plan to stand up and say this for all the amendments, but I did want to get that on the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Other opponent testimony. All righty. We will move on back to commission discussion. Commissioner, I think you are first.
Okay, thank you. Just back to Commissioner Kipley's point, I think you maybe stated that you thought 750 feet was too high to be sustainable. And I just go back to the fact that we started out with a map with planning and zoning and that we worked through all of those processes. And I'm just deferring to the work that was put in. I know Commissioner Kipley, you've been on those planning and zoning meetings and put in those late nights with the other members of the commission. And I would like to show respect for the time and the effort that they've put in. And I would be in favor of sticking with the 750. And I understand the 330 came from the emergency response guidebook. And I do kind of assume that that's probably a minimum, not necessarily to be taken into consideration across the board. I think it probably is the very least that the federal government could regulate. So for those reasons, I'm still content and happy and thankful for the work that was put in for the 750 feet.
Other comments? Commissioner Kipley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So yeah, I guess some background and history would, since we're doing, I appreciate the deference to planning and zoning. That's a group of volunteers that volunteer their time. We had a hearing on this that was started at 7 p.m. and we tried our darndest to make it till midnight, but we adjourned at 11:55. So that was basically a 5-hour meeting. We had a couple other issues involved too. But there has been a lot of diligence put into this. I would just, my procedural, again, as the liaison to that body, coming back and telling this body, my colleagues, I would say a lot of that was we needed a vehicle to get across the finish line. I think we have some duty to, if we're going to pass something, to try to get that done before the PUC hearings, to both give a sister agency in the PUC our sentiments towards these issues and our sense of a desire for local control, and in fairness to the pipeline companies seeking those permits before they would break ground and get on with their project to know whether we're going to regulate them or not. So we had a bit of a timeline, and to delay that after a 5-hour meeting, to delay that again to consider amendments. So I would just argue that this was a good draft that was always understood, and I made comments both at the Planning Commission and at the next County Commission meeting that next Tuesday to say this was a work in progress and there would be amendments coming. I would describe the 750 as largely a recognition that 1,000 was too big. So I would try to defend it from a perception that it is completely arbitrary, because it is less than 1,000. But I would argue that 330 has a basis in some guidelines, and although a lot of the feedback we got in just now in considering a number was completely about safety, I will try to pivot that to give a sense for why this is about land use. So the concept involved here of having, and again, it is not our role to second guess the federal government and PHMSA. So if they say, here's a diameter of a pipe that's allowed, here's a thickness of a pipe that's allowed, here's the depth it can be, that we don't have the authority to second guess it. So even though I get a sense that there's members of our community that would love the number to be basically as high as possible, I get that perception, and that's an argument to take up basically on the safety merits with PHMSA and the federal government. At our level, we are looking for a land use regulation that we want to understand what goes into, whether it's 750 or 330 feet. We want to understand what is going into that area, and 330 feet has a basis because as you get a building permit, the idea would be you understand that that building may have to be evacuated. And maybe that's the wrong number, but it's not, again, it's not this body to decide whether it happens to be 330 feet. If PHMSA wants to change that, they can, but in the environment that we live in today, if we're talking about a land use regulation to know what types of buildings and structures can be built within some radius of this pipeline, 330 feet has a basis in, we would be training and asking our first responders to know, here's buildings that are within that radius and here's buildings that are not. It is actually a non-arbitrary line that would say those buildings that are not within this would not be part of your response plan and would not be part of at least the initial response. There might be other circumstances that change. In any emergency management, you'd have secondary considerations and whatnot, but I think that is an important distinction to then go into planning and zoning discussions for future things that would come there. We did have one response that, yes, building entities that want to be near the pipeline could obviously waive any requirements of having a pipeline near them, but that again is part of the land use process, is to designate a buffer that says, hey, we want to reserve this space for potentially light industrial, that some businesses, we want the potential for growth in a certain sector in this area. So again, creating that buffer zone allows for that growth. So again, when you kind of know our role vis-a-vis the federal government and the PHMSA agency and what they've given us, I think 330 is reasonable, measured in something, based in something. The other point I would make, if we wanted to take PHMSA completely literally and just take all the safety comments into consideration, PHMSA would say only a 50-foot setback. So we're already stretching beyond safety and we need another justification besides safety, because otherwise PHMSA would say a 50-foot setback is reasonable, and that's with depth of cover 3 feet. If you go down 4 feet, there's essentially no setback. So all the safety commentary really doesn't get us anywhere unless we want no regulation and just fall back on PHMSA itself. So I think if we're going to get something across the finish line, I'm strongly in favor of the 330 feet.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll take the last comments then before we go to a vote. First of all, this is not personal. This is a very difficult decision being made by your county commission. It was brought forth by the planning commission. And we respect and all the work that volunteer group does. They are not the elected officials, and that's why we're here. So we get to make the difficult decisions in passing this into ordinance. This isn't personal, and we don't intend it. I at least do not intend it to be a personal thing. You know, the question when it comes to PHMSA and upcoming meetings, you know, if they had personally, if they lower it from 330 to 100, I'm probably not going to ask that we bring it back and lower it from 330 to 100. And likewise, if they change it from 330 to 500, well, yeah, then I might ask that, you know, we reconsider it. I think 330 is a good basis for measurement at this point. It seems like a logical number to use based on the 10 minutes of Commissioner Kipley's argument. But at the same point, they spent one evening and a lot of hours of input, and it is somewhat arbitrary. So I'm looking for a number I can tie my hat to, and it says that this is a good reason. The other thing is when I look at the map and I see the circles on the 750 feet, from what I can see, and I haven't taken that hard of a look, it does appear to really eliminate a lot of places that or eliminate totally the ability to permit a pipeline based on a 750-foot setback. I'm not in favor of that. I think we have to allow free enterprise, and there's a lot of people that are for this. There's a lot of people that are against it. We're just trying to come up with reasonable rules for us to move this forward. So, any other comments? Commissioner Benega.
Well, I'm not going to support the 330. Frankly, I even have trouble understanding the difference between what's public parks, schools, churches, and businesses and dwellings having two different categories. It seems to me if we're frankly interested in saving more people, if we exceed the federal guidelines, that's our choice. If the individual landowner wants to waive their right for the minimum setback, that's their choice. So I'm not going to support the 330. I think the number was used with common sense, and frankly, I think that's where we need to stick with.
Okay. Roll call vote on the amendment to change the setback to 330 feet from the property boundary.
Kipley.
Aye.
Benega.
No.
Blyenberg.
I'm sorry, was there an opportunity or is there going to be an opportunity to make any changes to the amendment, or was that passed?
I'll ask our Robert's Rule of Orders expert.
As to the question that's being voted on right now?
Yes, on this specific amendment.
No, it's, you could make another amendment if you wish, but this one's already past the point for discussion, so let's add a vote now.
Okay. No.
Karski.
Aye. So motion is 2-2. That automatically will carry this debate over to the June 6th on this proposed amendment. Commissioner Bleinberg, I'll open the floor to you if you would like to make a substitute motion.
Is there an opportunity for discussion among the commission?
Oh, yes.
On a substitute motion?
Mr. Chair, if I could clarify the chair's comment, it's actually
Okay.
not a substitute motion. At this time, there's no
Yeah, an
motion on
additional
the table.
motion.
This is just a new motion.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion to amend Commissioner Kipley's amendment. Okay, a fresh amendment. Okay, thank you. In regards to changing the setback from the 750 feet that the Planning and Zoning and the Planning Commission has created, I would entertain conversation about some mutual ground for the sake of.
And what are you proposing?
Would 650 feet be close to 600 feet? I will say 600 feet.
Okay. So, and I'm going to ask Mr. Bogue if Commissioner Kipley could amend his motion that was voted on, or if that's just done, or if we can reconsider.
Mr. Chair, unfortunately, the way that SDCL 7818 is worded, it says when the Board of County Commissioners is equally divided on any question, it shall be deferred to a decision until the next meeting of the board, when the matter shall then be decided by a majority of the board. So, as far as the continuance until the 6th, that ship has sailed. So this will all be concluded on the 6th. So.
Okay.
Even if you reach consensus on a new number, you still have a tie vote on one that will have to be resolved on the 6th.
Okay. So to that point then, Commissioner Bleinberg, I would ask that if you do have reconsideration, that maybe it be best addressed at the June 6th meeting.
Thank you.
Would you be willing to carry that over till then?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So we will go on to the next amendment.
Mr. Chair, our last amendment is again more of a procedural element that if and when we have a conditional use application, this amendment would just delete some ongoing fees and just maintain an initial application fee of the $25,000. Again, explanation on this is just largely feedback and conversation within staff and the pipeline companies, again, looking to have something that's reasonable for the ongoing relationship, and it honestly gets fairly burdensome to on staff time to collect this fee. So I think we just take our shot of, obviously this has some expenses to the county, we make that in the fee up front. The pipeline is paying property taxes, an ongoing revenue stream. So this is, I feel, just a cleanup to acknowledge that this isn't really a revenue generator or something that we want to deal with on an annual basis. So I see it as a cleanup that I don't really have strong opinions on, but just would like us to focus on the work of the county rather than having to collect nominal fees annually.
All righty. Questions from the commission?
Chairman Karski, I have a question.
Commissioner Bleinberg.
Commissioner Kipley, you mentioned feedback from staff also. Is that, can you elaborate? How is that burdensome?
Yeah, I guess I can ask Scott a question. I can't remember what the topic was, but there are a few things that we do collect annual fees, certain X number of acres of this type of use. We have, a couple $100 fee for each one. We have to send out invoices for, $1,000 or something. And
it's actually, so one of the fees you're referring to is an unreclaimed mining fee. So when a mining company gets a conditional use permit to do sand and gravel mining or hard rock mining, the way the ordinance is written is they have to annually provide or pay a fee, and I think it's $50 an acre for every open acre of sand and gravel pit. And it comes to, I think, less than $4,000 or $5,000 a year. And it does require, sending out an invoice tracking it. I wouldn't say it's a huge revenue generator. It's work. So that's one of the fees.
Thank you.
Scott, don't leave yet. Do you have more questions? Okay, I do have Scott. So I'm trying to understand this. A fee of $250 shall be charged for filing an application for a conditional use permit in any district. So a couple things there. What's a district? And if they're filing a conditional use permit to go across multiple properties and trying to do it all at once, are they filing one $250 fee, or is it $250 per?
I need to grab my reading glasses. So if you've read off A.
A, correct. Yep.
And that's not being changed. So if you look at, it's adding, it would be adding B, which is, which indicates that the fee shall be charged for the pipeline, and then in addition, there would be the fee for the 25,000 fee would be the application fee for the conditional use permit for specifically a transmission pipeline. Okay. The other, what you read applies to the conditional use permit fee for a kennel or a daycare. So that would not change for those other conditional use permits.
So the new language that we're addressing today, so this is somewhat confusing. B is the total language. A already exists. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's being except for the B. So it added the B item, which is the pipeline item.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Comment?
You bet.
If we maintain the fee for open gravel pits, I don't see why we would not keep that for other conditional use permits. And then a question would be, does that go into the general fund? Where does that fee go? Thank you.
All fees collected by the planning department go into the general fund.
Okay.
Okay.
And then regarding the property tax income, I'm not sure, Commissioner Kipley, if you can enlighten me a little bit on what that specifically is.
I've just heard, I don't know, maybe somebody that has estimates, I've heard into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, at least tens of thousands of dollars of property tax revenue. So that's an ongoing revenue source. So it's not like the entity involved is not paying some ongoing aspect, but I would defer to Carol if she's got a better answer.
Chairperson. Carol Muller, Commission Office. I do not have a definitive answer for you on that. But what happens through annually is by the fourth Thursday of August, I believe, we are to be told the centrally assessed number that comes to the auditor's office. And that number is going to be what we receive on any utility, pipelines, rail lines, those types of things. And please, I probably suggest not quoting me on this because I don't have all the definitive information on it. But I do remember it's that fourth Thursday that we come across and we get the taxes that are out of there. I would just state that when they talk about how much money comes to the county, remember that that is then dispersed out to a lot of taxing authorities out there. And that on average, we keep 20% of any property taxes that come in. So that's just a very general answer for you, and would defer if the attorney has anything that he would like to add.
Mr. Chair, on that question, I did reach out to the Department of Revenue. They did confirm that this will be centrally assessed property. They do not have any computation as of yet what Minnehaha County will receive. So no number is determined yet by the Department of Revenue. So
my understanding, windmill or wind generation, pipelines, et cetera, are all assessed by the state, not by the county, and that revenue is funneled through the state back to the counties.
That's correct, and as Carol pointed out, then that's distributed across several different taxing entities or governmental entities that normally receive the property tax, so.
Okay. All righty. Commissioner?
I would just reemphasize my initial point. I don't feel like we're, yeah.
Okay. Other comments?
Well, frankly, if I might.
Please.
I don't think the $300 per linear mile is going to put anybody in the pipeline industry out of business. The other piece of that is we're going to have ongoing issues to provide townships and rural communities with support of their volunteer fire departments and all that kind of stuff. So I have no problem with the $300.
All righty. I have no comments. Commissioner Kipley, do you want to make a motion?
And fail for lack of a second. I think, yeah, let's go through the motions, I guess. I will make a motion for amendment JK-03 striking 24.05B2.
Okay, so we have a motion to remove 2 from 2405B. Look for a second. Okay, I'm going to let that die for lack of a second. Prophetic of you, Commissioner. All righty. So where we're at now, we have no other amendments being proposed. We will have a vote on the 300-foot setback with maybe future amendments. Maybe they're higher, maybe they're lower. That's totally open at the June 6th meeting as to what could be proposed. So we will have a meeting on June 6th. It will address the setbacks, and then we will have, well, and possibly more. And then we will have hopefully 5 commissioners here, and we will have the opportunity to vote on the entire ordinance. I will caution you that testimony at the June 6th meeting will be limited. We will not take repeat testimony. So if you said it today, we're not going to hear it again in 2 weeks. That being done, I don't think I need a motion to delay this because it's already been delayed, or do I need a motion to delay it to a specific date?
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with you that by statute language, it's automatically continued or deferred, so I don't think you're required to have a motion at this point. So.
Okay. So June 6th is our next regular meeting. That's the date that this will be hopefully finalized. So that gives, fortunately, everybody time to talk to us or anybody else. So we encourage communication from our constituents and from proponents and opponents. So we will move on then to, my computer died, so I got to find my paperwork. Item number 12, a petition for compromise of lien. Melinda, are you here? Give her a chance to come through the door. She'd probably be running, so.
Commissioners, if you look in that little flip box in front of you, there should be a charging cord for you. I think that will work.
Is that what that's
if you want to double check. We did at one point put them in there.
I thought you were going to clear the room.
Good afternoon.
Hello, Melinda Storley, Commission Office. Today's action requested on is to compromise lien DPNO 84758 in full with payment of $651.60, which is 50% of the lien amount. The lien represents attorney fees. The petitioner states that she was unaware of the lien until the lender had informed her of it. She is hoping that you'll accept her offer so that her husband will be able to close on June 15th on the purchase of a home for her and her 2 grandchildren. Her narrative states that several recent health issues have kept her from working, and with the passing of their landlord and the sale of the home they were living in, they needed to find a home
and move as soon as possible. They were pleased to have qualified for a mortgage. The FHA home loan will only be in her husband's name, but nevertheless, she is expected to resolve the lien prior to the closing because they are married. They've been married since 1988, but have never owned a home. The petitioner provided a copy of their 2022 income taxes, which shows wages of $72,939, a refund of $11,568, and a child tax credit of $2,500. She also provided a copy of the purchase contract for $285,000, which also confirms the closing date of June 15th. She wasn't able to make it. She has a conflict with the home inspection today.
Okay. Questions for Melinda? Commissioner Benega.
My only question is, why wouldn't they have both names on the FHA loan?
Because of the lien is what she was telling me. I don't know if because she hasn't been employed for a bit, for a couple of years due to her illness, they didn't want to have her on it, but she didn't provide an answer for that.
I'd have to say I'm suspicious of that for some reason.
Other questions?
I don't know the situation with the person at all, but I know when we purchased our first home, my name was not on the loan simply because we were young and had no credit. I know that's not her situation, but a poor credit score is sometimes the reason why you would only have one person on a mortgage.
Okay. So we have a request to petition, or a petition to request compromise of this lien for 50% settlement. It's not a large amount. What is the total dollar amount for the settlement?
It's $651.60. That's 50% of the lien. The lien balance right now is $1,303.20.
Yeah. Because this lien is on her husband can't close.
Yes.
Okay. Maybe there's something legal there I don't understand, but okay. All right. Any other questions? Motions?
I'll move approval.
I'll second it for conversation.
Okay.
The one that provided the service, we paid the bills, and when you look at her tax return on the substantial amount of a refund that she's getting, we're getting a very small piece of that.
Okay.
Could I add to the discussion?
Please.
Melinda, do you know how it says that she's had recent health issues? Has that been ongoing? Is the income tax, the AGI, prior to the health issues, or is that considering her health issues also? Was that?
I don't have that information for you. I'm sorry. When they do mention that type of information, I just don't probe. It has nothing to do with, her illness has nothing to do with the request for compromise. She was forthcoming and mentioned that that's why she hadn't been working. She is wanting to go back to work, but that's not going on right now. She has another procedure coming up, so.
When's the loan closing?
On the 15th of June.
Okay, so in 3 weeks. I would ask maybe that the motion be for $1,000 instead of $650, and I could support that.
I think we're still gonna have to accept that, and does that take effect, or do we have to come back on June 6th and accept her offer of $1,000? I guess you need two to tango. I mean, the offer and acceptance, because right now essentially she's made an offer of 50%. We can accept that and then it'd be done, or we could deny that and she could always pay the full amount. But like, I'm just wondering procedurally, if we start picking new numbers, do we have to come back on June 6th and redo this anyway?
Sure.
Please.
Commissioner Kipley, all good questions. I think your recitation of basic contract laws is spot on. She's made an offer. If you're not happy with that offer, you certainly can just simply reject that. However, this body has not uncommonly offered a substitute amount, and if she accepts that, that wouldn't necessarily have to then come back on the 6th. Between now and then, if she accepts it on her own and pays that amount.
So in a sense, she could accept our counter offer.
Right.
Okay. I was just making sure that that was a fruitful use of our time. Otherwise, if we still have to revisit this again, because I don't know, it's unfortunate that she couldn't be here herself. She might be able to. And I just know Melinda does such a great job with these folks that by the time it gets to us, it's in pretty good shape. That's why I was leaning towards accepting it, I guess. On that conversation, I guess I can withdraw my motion because I felt like it was a lackluster second anyway, my friend Gerald. Let's try that. I'll make a motion for a counter offer to compromise her lien if those terms are acceptable to her, if she can pay $1,000.
So we have a substitute motion.
You can try to insult me, but that never works. I'd be happy to take it off the table.
So, well, are we substituting or are we withdrawing?
So I withdrew, and then now a fresh motion to counter offer back to her for $1,000.
Commissioner Benega, we got two things going on. Let's do one thing at a time. We have a motion to withdraw. Commissioner Benega, are you willing to withdraw your second?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now do you want to make another motion?
So the new fresh motion is to compromise the lien for $1,000.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? Roll call vote.
Kipley.
Aye.
Benega.
Aye.
Blyenberg.
Aye.
Karski.
Aye. Motion carries. All right. I'm sure we want to stick around longer, and we have liaison reports, commission discussion, but more importantly, we do have public comment. Would anybody like to address the commission?
Hi, good afternoon, Jessica Palama, Lincoln County. I just came here to report to you what happened in Lincoln County Commission meeting this morning. The ES&S contract was up for renewal in Lincoln County, and the commission voted to put that contract aside until August 1. And the Secretary of State is having a summer study this summer, and some of your legislators and your auditor are on that summer study. And also, they are going to ES&S to have a trip to ES&S with a delegation, and that's coming up in June. And so the Lincoln County Commission agreed to table the signing of the contract until reports can come back from those two things that are happening this summer. And then also did agree to host a public session, a special session in the evening that the citizens of Lincoln County can attend. So I'm here yet again to request that you guys would participate in something like that. Lincoln County has already agreed. Your auditor presented last week that she wants to have a listening and learning session with Minnehaha County. And if you would agree to participate with Lincoln County and host a special session in the evening to discuss election issues, concerns of your constituents, that it's a perfect opportunity to have all the citizens of Sioux Falls, Minnehaha, and Lincoln represented together. And there are many legislative districts that span both counties, and then you would be able to have continuity between the two. So I'm here again just asking you to please consider, and if you are interested, we would be happy to line that up for everyone. So I think you probably all have my number, but if not, I'll talk to you later. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment? Mr. Klochek.
Thank you, Acting Chairman Karski. Frank Klochek, Scotland, retired legislator and friend of property owners and the people of South Dakota. I know you've had some real contentious issues today and very concerned, and I'm not doing this, saying this as expert on anything, but in my years of service, I would always try to err on the side of the people. What was right for the people, such as the previous issue, and what was in the long-term best interest of my district, the county, the state, whatever. And you are the biggest county, probably the most wealthiest county in the state. So the rest of the counties are looking up to you or at you for guidance on these issues, and this is especially tough one, and doing the right thing. And I would ask that you, at your next meeting, certainly support property owners and the CO2 to make it safer. And we were at Huron, we had the videos, we saw all that stuff, and I am a ethanol producer, or ethanol corn producer. I do buy my product there in Scotland, where the first ethanol plant is. Strong supporter of ethanol. So, but good luck in your deliberations, this and any other issues you have. But I just want to emphasize that you are being looked at as the biggest county in the state, and your knowledge, and thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Scott Montgomery, Fairview. I'd just like to ask you guys, I sent you a bunch of emails over the weekend. Did any of you watch what happened with the rupture down in Mississippi? Did anybody read the article of what happened down there? And we're sitting here talking, we're not about safety. Why aren't we about safety? I mean, this should be about protecting the people of this county. And if you're not going to stand up for the people of the county, you ought to resign your job and leave. Thank you very much.
Anybody else here for public comment? No?
I'd like to hand out a handout to you.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to have you give it to Tyler, and he can take care of that. Did you have comments along with your handout, sir? And if we're not taking pipeline testimony anymore, I'm going to ask that you refrain from anything to do with pipelines to the next week when everybody's here that would be interested in your comments.
I don't hear well anymore.
Okay.
I don't hear well anymore. Could you repeat that?
Yes, if your comments are on the pipeline testimony or more additional comments on the pipeline, that you hold them till June 6th. We've already been through that, and I would prefer that the entire room that is interested in those comments.
Hear you.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right, anybody else for public comment? All right, seeing none, I will move on then to our liaison reports. Commissioners. I've got about a half-hour report on the, no, last week I was in Salem for the Sioux Metro Growth Alliance monthly meeting, so commuted to there, had a very good meeting. The room was full of people. A lot of really kind of the talk and discussion was on what can the Sioux Metro Growth Alliance do to foster growth and development within their operations. So still a work in progress, but going on. So, okay, anybody else?
I could just share that I had a meeting with the library board, Siouxland Library. It was a great meeting. Thankful for that liaison assignment. And just a fun fact, some of the rural libraries are now using a badge reader access so that you can get your books, whether they're holds or just checking out random items after hours when there's no staff. So they're saving money on staffing, and it seems to be working well. So if you're a rural resident, or if you just find yourself in Hartford and want to check out a book, you can obtain that badge and access it during evening hours.
Excellent. Commissioner Kipley.
Two quick items. We had our quarterly meeting this morning for the Public Defender's Office, for the Public Defender Advisory Group. Nothing earth-shattering news breaking there, but just the concept of we've got a couple summer studies coming out of the legislature, or the task force on indigent defense, and the county's summer study that I think are going to have some potential overlap, where the state will be looking at some issues related to that. So we'll just keep your eyes open for how that develops. And then we had planning and zoning last night. Joint jurisdiction with Sioux Falls had a couple items that will have to go forward to the next joint meeting of this body and the city council on some zoning items, and specifically we heard the planned development for the new Mapleton golf course is one of those items. So that will be in the next month or two with the joint city meeting. So that's all I've got.
In 16 minutes, I'm in the next Metro Management Governance Committee.
Oh, yay.
So, and we had one of those a couple weeks ago. So we're in that process. We'll report fully later.
So you're going to talk for 14 minutes, so you can go right into that?
No, I'm
Okay.
got to be there in 14.
Okay. All righty. Any non-action commission discussion? I have one thing that'll be coming up at the next meeting. I'm working on a resolution that will be presented by Monty Wanabach that will go to the Southeast District meeting of county commissioners for inclusion on their annual resolutions for the state legislature, and it's regarding in-code and property taxes and et cetera. So you'll be seeing more on that. Carol talked about it last week. The state kind of already has, not kind of, basically already has their agenda on what they want to talk about with helping counties. So this is we're going to go out on a different route to get this one done. So it'll be coming forward next meeting. It has to be voted on before our June 22nd or 24th meeting that we're going to have in Beersford. So, yep. All righty. We are going into exec. We're not going on. No. So, motion to recess.
Motion to adjourn.
Let's adjourn. Okay,
I'll
motion
move
to
to
adjourn.
adjourn.
Second.
2 seconds on a motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. We are adjourned.